Hello, everyone. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome to For the Love of Comics and another Sunday live stream. I love these live streams. I always have a great time in them, but I like to figure out a theme or a loose topic around which a live stream can be made, and trying to figure out what should be a live stream and what should be an edited video usually ends up being quite puzzlement for me, because whenever I start thinking about a live stream I start thinking about how I'd like to edit it as a video. And then when I'm thinking about videos, I'm thinking, well, maybe this would be better as a live stream. So I think the main thing is the interaction with the chat. But at the same time, even if I can't look at the chat constantly because I'm looking at something else or I'm talking about something else, there's just something a lot looser and a lot more unstructured about a live stream. So giving it a general sort of framework and then seeing what happens, those are the type of topics I like to pick for live streams. And today's one is as the saying goes, a whopper, because this is a video that I've been asked to do by people for as long as I've been on YouTube. So those of you who are familiar with this channel will know that I've made a number of Tintin videos, and a number of my viewers and subscribers have actually found me first through a Tintin video of mine. I had a series overview, and I've looked at old original editions, not editions, but original facsimile copies of Tintin adventures that were later redrawn, something that many Tintin fans, even like myself, weren't aware of as a thing. I've gone over the entire series. I've looked at some particular nice editions of them. Tintin is just a series that I've grown up with. And in spite of making numerous other videos on numerous other comics, the Tintin videos end up being, how can I put this, the most passionately and devoutedly commented upon in certain ways. There are some people who maybe I think just watch my Tintin videos and no other videos, which is, I'd say check out the other ones, but I completely appreciate it. I understand that fandom and that passion, and especially the childhood nostalgia that comes with the series. But there are a number of people who are not familiar with the series or became familiar only later, and chatting with them about why does Tintin appeal so much to certain people, discussing whether it's universal or whether it's a thing of the past. There are just so many different topics that have to do with Tintin. But at the same time, because I want to make other videos, because there are other things I wish to make, I like to space out any videos on Tintin that I make. I don't want it to come across as only a channel for Tintin comics and, of course, Tintin videos. But, of course, I hope that's not the case. And there have been times when it's a bit like the play Freebird type of thing. Is like, no matter what you do, people are like, when's your next Tintin video coming out? Or can you make a video on this Tintin adventure, etc. But as I was saying, one of the most requested ones is, please rank the Tintins. Give us your complete rankings of all of the Tintin adventures, which is a thing that people love to do. Now, this has been a thing that I've considered, but I've always shied away from it. And I've shied away from it for a number of reasons. And of course, this being For the Love of Comics, I'm hoping to spend a little bit of time talking about what those reasons are, and of course the reasons why I have changed my mind, and why in today's live stream I will be ranking all of the 23 complete adventures of Tintin. Something that I've never done before. I've never done rankings. I've never talked about, and there are a number of other things also that are new on this live stream. So before I get into all of those things, before I get into the caveats and disclaimers, and of course, before I sink my teeth into the talking about the adventures themselves and doing the thing that we're doing, which is a tier list. That's another one of my firsts. I've never done a tier list before. I've seen others do it, and in preparation for this video, I went out and watched a couple of channels that I like and some tier lists that they've done. A couple of them were kind of spoofy or even postmodern tier lists, dissecting the idea of a tier list itself. But if you're not familiar with tier lists, if you're not familiar with Tintin, if you're not familiar with any of these things, I think this can still be maybe a fun time. But before I jump into all of that, let me say hello to everyone in the chat. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Let me quickly go through these comments of all the new things that I've put into these live streams and will continue to do so. Popping the comments out on screen is still something that defeats me. It's just something I haven't been able to figure out how to do it logically. I mean, how to do it smoothly and efficiently. So I'll just have to call you out this way. And of course, I love hearing where people are from. So if you want to put into the comments where you're watching from, where around the world, that would be beautiful as well. So glitched out, good to see you. Ritvik Sharkar is here. Panels with Pete is here. Samrat Sur is here. Javed 8, Elderwood, Zoli IZS, Arcs. Is that Arcs? Arcus, SRK fan. Oh, RKS SRK fan 007. Hello, Tintin 10. Good to see you, Tintin 10. You're in the right place. Arindam Sen, what a week, huh? Yes, and the upcoming weeks as well. For the love of Tintin brings you here. Good to see you. You can see I am hopefully appropriately dressed for one of my videos for once. Thank you, Freebird. It is indeed AM. Mouse Guard Black and White. Oh, you picked up Mouse Guard Black and White. That's fantastic. I'm so glad to know that those editions are still available for people to pick up. They are fantastic editions. That makes me very happy. Panels with Pete says only read The Blue Lotus and Secret of the Unicorn, not an acolyte, but enjoyed them both. Fantastic. Yes, I'd like to take this approach as a sort of knowing wise man approach, because I've been reading Tintin all my life, or as far as I can remember. I have been reading Tintin and I've reread them many times, but at the same time I have encountered many people who've never read this comic, and it's one of those odd things is that the people who have grown up with Tintin or are familiar with Tintin, for them it's inconceivable to think of people who haven't heard of Tintin. It's kind of the way some people might think about Superman or Mickey Mouse, and I have talked about in other videos. But again, I'm hoping that this will be appealing to you no matter what your level of familiarity. In fact, there might be some controversy, there might be some argument, and there might be some disagreement. I may make some statements that don't fly or don't work for Tintin fans, and for those of you who don't have a dog in the fight, it might end up being an entertaining thing to witness. Who knows? We'll see how it goes. Real quick, is my audio and video working all right? Do let me know in the comments if the audio needs to be turned up, if the lighting and everything is okay. As I said, there are a couple of things I'm trying, technical behind the scenes new stuff. Part of this is also, and I might have tried this before, is a slightly lighter setup as far as my headphones are concerned. I don't like wearing, so I've got this thing in this one ear, but now I'm fidgeting with it like a Secret Service agent on the first day of their job. But hopefully I'll get. When is your next Usagi video coming? All right, so if it's not Freebird, it's, I don't know, Sweet Home Alabama, something. I have been meaning to make a video on catching up with things, and Usagi Yojimbo finishing up its IDW run and moving back to Dark Horse. I'd like to make a video at least on those last IDW volumes, but let's see. Panels with Pete says, I know rankings and lists seem like low-hanging fruit. Yes, they are. But I love them, and I'm sucker for a tier list. And I do want to talk about Tintin and the tier list and why I chose the tier list specifically and rankings and all of that stuff. But Shrelp, good to see you. Ganpati Subramaniam, good to see you from Chennai. We've got Romania, from Kolkata, of course. Also from Kolkata, one of the most devout places for Tintin. That is true. Calcutta, Kolkata, Bengalis in India have a reputation for being Tintin fans, primarily because of the history of Tintin, including Tintin being translated into Bengali a long time before, I think, it was even available in English, in at least commonly in India. So there was a periodical and newspapers, I think, later that you could read Tintin in serialized in Bengali. And so therefore there was a certain group of people who got to know about Tintin before everybody else in India. And I think that might be one of the big reasons for that as well. From Halifax, Nova Scotia, So the kids are being juggled while, and this is going to be, I think, over the last couple of months, I think the last few live streams we've had for the love of comics is not known for short videos or short live streams, and they were kind of short by our standards, between an hour and a couple of hours. We have had longer live streams before. I think our record is a 4-hour live stream. While this is probably not going to approach that, that was, I think, maybe the best writer editor Eisner Award live stream, because there were a lot of them, or maybe it was the, I'm forgetting now, but it was one of the Eisner Award ones, because they were a double category, maybe fiction and non-fiction. But that was a long live stream. However, when trying to calculate how long I think this live stream is going to go, I said, well, there's a preamble and this opening discussion, blah, blah, blah. And then there are 23 albums that we're going to talk about. So if I talk about each for about a minute, that's about 23 minutes. I should be done in 45 minutes. Now, maybe that already strikes you as funny, and if you're watching this on the recording later, that you'll know how long this went. So maybe the comedy is evident already for everyone. But I'm going to see how long it takes. I don't have any plans for anything else to do this Sunday night. And settling in with this, I hope I have my, yes, I have my water down here. If I can just get this cable to behave itself. First time watching live from St. Helens, England. Good to have you here. Let me know what you think about the live streams. They are a little different, hopefully not too different. And I've been trying to, as I keep saying, trying to make the live streams a little different. I'm trying different things with the lighting and the colors. I'm actually color grading a live stream for the first time in my life. So that's one of the new things that's happening is I have my camera on log footage, and I'm applying what's called a lookup table, or a color grade filter, if you will. I'm applying that on top of the stream. I'm not sure how it will work. My computer seems to be holding up with it, and it's kind of fun. I didn't know that I could get creative with the color grading in live streams, and apparently you can. The microphone is also on a desk stand, because I'm hoping to be able to move this from place to place. I do have, and let me see if I can display this for you correctly. I do have a B cam. And this one, I couldn't get it to be top down, but I think there might be something quite interesting from this angle as well. I'll move over here later if we need to look at things. So I'm not holding this properly right now, or I'd be able to hold this better. It is, of course, mirrored, etc. The exposure on it, I think, is okay. So there's that, of course. And there's this one, and then we of course have a tier list, which I'll get to talking about right now. Did I say hello to everyone? I did see about the Belgium football team. I don't know if everyone's seen it, but I saw that early this morning, and that was great to see. From Australia, good to have you. I know it's late in Australia, so as long as you can hang out, it's appreciated, and you can catch up with the rest of it on the recording. Good. I'm glad to see that the Bcam is working. So let me talk a little bit about, well, not about Tintin, because that's what we're going to be talking about from now on, but ranking. And for those of you who've been around for long enough, and those of you who don't know me, I don't like ranking comics. I don't like saying this one is better than that one. I like talking about what I love about comics, and I love talking about, and I love making lists. I love making my favorite, personal kind of list, my top 10. But even that top 10, I don't like to rank them. And even this idea of the top 10 means that there's a number 11 and there's a number 12. It doesn't quite work for me. And I particularly don't like numerical scores and letter grades. So giving something a 98 out of 100 versus a 96, or an A versus a B, and even the letter grades, they somehow represent numerical scores, I think, to me. 90 to 100 is an A, and 80 to 90 is, or 89 is a B, and so forth. And assigning that sort of numerical grade or value to something, and particularly when you also do that to something else, then you end up with things like, oh, so do you really think this issue of Superman is better than that novel by Craig Thompson because you gave this an 88 and you gave that an 87. I mean, those are the kind of things that they just don't make sense. I'd much rather talk in detail about good things and bad things and try to get to a more nuanced evaluation. That's the highbrow thing that I want to say. At the same time, I have said that I love lists, and I love the idea of making lists. And as someone was saying in the comments right now, is in spite of it being low hanging fruit, I have enjoyed watching tier lists because I have enjoyed watching the thinking process of why something is going at a certain tier or above or below that. Sleepy Reader, good to see you here. Jimat Bahan, I'm glad to see you over here as well. Lot looks good, thank you. A snapshot of feelings for the moment. I just saw Sleepy Reader's comment, and that's a good way of looking at it. I'm too worried about the fact that anything we say gets fixed in time and becomes permanent. So the fact that it's a snapshot in time and can change and evolve, I think is absolutely a nuanced and worthwhile thing to keep in mind. At the same time, the idea of a grade or the idea of a number score seems almost antithetical to that. It seems to be something that here is an empirical statistical truth. Here is a fact, rather than an opinion. And it somehow represents itself as a fact a little bit more, maybe because of the cosmetics of grades and numbers. It's supposed to be, standardized testing and exam results and things like that. How do you know who did best? Because you know their score, things like that. But as I was saying, I do like tier lists. I do like talking about things. And the idea of a tier list, and for those of you who are not familiar, let me try my next. This is the tier list. And what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be placing each Tintin adventure into one of these tiers. There are 6 tiers over here. So the first thing that I saw is that most of the tier list, or I went on Tier Maker, which is where this is, and the default is 5. And I thought 5 was not enough tiers. So I added a 6th one, and I didn't like the A, B, C, D with the S for superb or S level. I don't know what the S actually stands for, but it's above the A. They represented too much. They were too similar to letter grades, or I thought of them as letter grades. So I changed their description. To go from not good to not bad to pretty good, great, excellent, and sublime. That's where I'm going to be placing each of these adventures. And what I am thinking about as far as this is concerned is the tier list represents a very what's the word I'm looking for? A very relative scale. So this is not an absolute level of grades. By what I mean is, so let's go back there. If I have not good at the bottom and sublime at the bottom, what I'm saying is there is at least one adventure that will classify as not good and at least one that will classify as sublime. So these are not things that I would just take and anything that is not good over here, if I was doing a tier list for some other thing like Asterix Adventures or things like that, it would be on a 1-to-1 comparison. By what I mean is, this is a relative scale. I'm going to take every adventure and put it on this scale. If there was such a thing as there is no such Tintin that is not good, I just wouldn't have that over here. I wouldn't put that in there only to leave it blank. I hope that makes sense. So that's another reason why the tier list appealed to me, is because I can say no matter where I put them, they're only there in relation to each other, which is the thing that allows me to get over my dislike of ranking. Because I've said in the past that what I can envision doing is ranking works by the same creator. So I can rank all the Tintins maybe, or maybe all Alan Moore. I can rank someone against other work of theirs. And with collaborations, it becomes difficult, with artist-writer collaborations. So particularly with writer-artists, I can do this. I can rank them against each other because it's relative. It's not absolute. Even then, I have some problems, like how can I really say this book is better than the other book? So although I don't think I need to say this, I will say it. this is all opinion. It's not science. It's not empirical. It's not the absolute universal truth. This is just what I feel. And when it comes to things like our childhood favorites and with nostalgia, there tends to be very strong feelings for some reason or the other. And I won't say that I have not been guilty of such things in the past myself, but I hope that everyone sees this in the right spirit, which is this is just one person's opinion. They're going to give you what they think and why they think it. And this is why I wanted it on a live stream, because it would be great to get other people's opinions as well in the chat. Even if I can't follow along with it, everyone else can chat with each other. Oh, that reminds me, do go ahead and switch your chat, whether you're watching this in the recording later or are live right now. Go ahead and switch it to live chat instead of top chat, because top chat just shows a selection, whereas live chat will show you all the messages. So I thought this was a great thing that people could talk about, people who are familiar, people who have expert opinions, people who have critique and analyses, as well as people who are just listening and reading other people's opinions, people who are not familiar with the series perhaps, or would like to know where to start. There are a lot of different ways I think that this live stream can work. So it's just an opinion. I have created this template on tiermaker.com. I think it's public and searchable. If not, I'll make it public after this live stream. So you can search for this exact template, because I've added these covers. I've gotten them from various places online, but I've added these covers and put them in order and made these particular categories as a template that you can then use to create your own tier list and maybe share it. So you should be able to download this on your own. You should be able to follow along if you want to do your own thing or do it later and share it with people. I don't know how you would share an image. Of course, you could go to the Friends of the FTLOC, the Discord server, and share over there. But yes, this is open, and if you don't agree with my opinion, go ahead and express yours in that way. Have I gone through all my caveats and disclaimers? It hasn't even been half an hour, so I don't think that's possible. So what are we going to do? What are we going to do today? We are going to go through focus. There we go. We are going to go through each of the 23 complete adventures of Tintin by Herge, and we are going to put them on this tier list in chronological order. By what I mean is I'm going to start with the first one and go to the last one, and they're going to go to, so I'm not going to do everything that goes in the lower tier first, etc., which I don't think it's the way anyway. So it's going to be in chronological order. What will we include in this? So, as I said, the 23 complete adventures of Tintin by Herge, which means that we are going to be leaving out Tintin and the Elf art, which is, of course, which is, of course, included in the Tintin Egmont box set. It is part of the complete collection, but as you can see, and as you may or may not know, it is an incomplete adventure. Now, this has been completed in an unofficial capacity, I think by Didier, and I have read that in PDF, pirate form, because that's the only way it is available. But it isn't a complete adventure. The finished completed adventure isn't by Herge. And as much as I like this as an artifact and as a glimpse into what may have been, I would not be able to place this on a chart alongside. I keep messing up where I'm supposed to cut because I've got two different cuts over here. So I hope these are just teething problems and won't happen during that. So Tintin and the Elf art is not going to be part of this tier list. What else is not going to be part of this tier list? Yves Rodier. Yes, that's correct. Yes, I was getting confused. But also Lake of Sharks. Tintin and the Lake of Sharks is not going to be on there, even though this was published by Magnet, who published the other adventures, etc. And the reason why this isn't going to be on the list is the same one, is this is not this is, I mean, although this is complete, it's the same thing as it's not by Herge. This is a book of the film. And let me actually move my mic now and see if I can. There we go. Now I'm going to move over here. It's a little bit, I should have practiced this a little bit more. But Lake of Sharks is not by Herge. This is based on a film, and so therefore this adventure comprises stills from the film, from frames of the animated movie, made into a comic book version. And this was, when I was a kid, this was entertaining, but it definitely stood out as not feeling like the others. Now, this does not have your, I mean, although the art style obviously is very much replicated in the animation, this is not something that I consider a canonical Tintin adventure. And by canonical, I don't mean in the history of the story. It's actually quite entertaining. You have Rastapopoulos, you've got some fantastic set pieces, you've got a sunken underwater city, you've got lovely machinery, you've got some interesting things with perspective that happen right at the end, but they're all from the movie. And one of the things is you don't have the kind of action sequences, you don't have the kind of panel craft, you don't have the page by page storytelling beats that Herge and Studios Herge put in. You have references to Tintin adventures, but you also have a lot of things that are cut and pasted and sort of amalgamated. And I know that a lot of people hold this in they hold this to be very nostalgic. They read this also as kids, but equally a number of people I know never encountered this when they were younger. They never read this, and people who read it later, or even as kids separately from the other adventures, always knew there was something off about this. Most of the people, but it's just, it doesn't have the same flavor. And once again, I don't think it would be fair to put it up on the spectrum that we're putting up, which is really going to be about Herge, Herge storytelling. And the final thing that I wanted to note is whenever I say Herge, which, by the way, I didn't even know how to pronounce his name properly until I started making videos, and it corrected for me. And not to say that I am pronouncing it absolutely accurately right now, but it is much improved. But when I say Herge, I mean Herge and his collaborators at Studios Herge. As we will see later on, there are a number of different contributions that were made to these adventures by other artists. And this is something, again, as a child, when I was young, I didn't know this. I just thought it was one guy writing and drawing everything. And the fact that you can see how Herge started out as a young man in his earliest adventures and how he developed his style, and then you can see how incredibly popular he became. And then the density and the texture and the beauty of some of these comics, the most memorable things in some of these comics, like the machinery, the airplanes, the boats, etc., were very often contributions by other artists who worked under the name Herge, because he insisted that no other Tintin would never be published under any other author's name. So Herge really stands for a group of people, especially in the later, the second half of the Tintin oeuvre, as far as it goes. So when I say Herge, I mean everybody else who was involved with Georges Remy in creating these adventures. So now, Spons is not on. We can. There's some great Tintin conversation already going on over here. Bad Press says Lake of Sharks was the first Tintin they read. That's interesting. I guess it's all uphill from there, or is it? That's where the tier list will come in. So let's get started with the tier list. Oh yeah, one other thing is, in case you're curious, for this video, I will be using the Egmont paperbacks box set. I do have the hardcovers of Egmont. I've got some old Magnet and Methuen ratty copies from my childhood as well. There are a couple of omnibus editions and 3-in-1 editions, but this is the most consistent, and this is what I'm going to be using. And we're going to start we're going to start right now, unless there are any questions. Does the new cigars colorized album rank? This is a good question, actually. Before we get started, you thought I was almost there, but no, we've got more caveats to go. Before I get started, something that not everybody knows, and it was definitely not something I knew until much, much later in life, is that the first 9 adventures of Tintin were redrawn later by Herge himself and by his collaborators. Most remarkable to me is the Black Island, because I did not know that there was an older black and white version of the Black Island, and that was the first one I encountered in its facsimile, and I have videos on several of these facsimiles. So for this video, I will be using the recolored, not the recolored, the redrawn modern versions of all the stories, which means that particularly for the first 9 adventures, I will be using the versions that are most commonly available, the ones that are published by Egmont in the full album size, and I think Little Brown in the United States in the smaller pocketbook 3-in-1 sizes. There are various editions out there, but the English translation by Michael Turner and Leslie Lonsdale Cooper. Of course, I would forget the names right now. But the idea being that I'm going to go with the most familiar and the most easily available. So I'm not looking at the originals. The one exception might be Tintin in the Congo, which I may have in one of my videos mistakenly said was never redrawn. It was redrawn, it was shrunken down. The original stories of these first 9 adventures were about 128 pages. In fact, the very first story, Tintin in the Land of the Soviets, was like 140 or 142 pages, I think. But then they're 62-page stories as we know them. So these first 9 were cut down to 62 pages. They were redrawn. Collaborators came in and provided background elements and redrew environments and machinery and vehicles, and Herge redrew the figures to match his more modern style. So it's the redrawn version that I will be using in these rankings, and I'll make a note if that makes a difference. And in many cases, and in some particular cases, it will make a difference, because that's the version that I grew up with. I found the original facsimile editions much later on in life, and they're sort of not really part of my thinking about the whole body of work when it comes to things like, oh, which one is better than, which one is your favorite, which one's your second favorite. They don't come into that kind of conversation. That kind of conversation is a much more based in nostalgia one, based in how many times you've reread it. And for me, it is the redrawn modern versions of these stories. So the first 9 stories, and this is where I think where we can begin our controversies, as it were. And you can let me know in the comments below how you think I should do this. Should I go to the B cam if there are things that we want to talk about specifically within a book? I'm not really hoping for a lot of time on the B cam. Also, the B cam is on batteries, although this camera is on power. So I don't know how long that will last. I think I should be able to switch to another battery in the middle of the shoot, but maybe not. Anyway, so what we're going to start with is the very first Tintin adventure, and that is Tintin in the Land of the Soviets. This was something that Herge did when he was only, I think, 21 or 22 years old. Phenomenally, I mean, he was just getting started, but I think from the very beginning, you could see a lot of traces of the kind of adventures that this gentleman, this young reporter, although I will say that he was not a reporter at that time. I don't think he was established as a reporter until much later on. But as you can see, the very first adventure, much thicker than the other adventures. And this is what all 9 of the first 9 adventures, this is what they all look like. They were in black and white. They were large drawings, so there were fewer panels per page, usually at about 6 or 7 panels a page, as you can see over here. And to be honest, as remarkable this series is, and as much as it ended up becoming a phenomenon across decades and decades, it didn't really start off on its strongest feet, so to speak. The land of the Soviets, Tintin and the land of the Soviets, as well as Tintin in the Congo, are not generally considered. Um, they're not generally considered to be the finest of the Tintin adventures, and that's for good reason, I would say. I think that there are problematic things, and I know that there are people who will say that there are problematic depictions and problematic views of the world, particularly colonial views and things that have to do with the way races and other people, other like non-European people are seen. And there is a lot that's correct in that, but I would say that in the later adventures they were far more mitigated, they were far fewer, and there were other things that sort of, if not justified them, nothing justifies them, but they balance themselves out. So the depiction of things according to the times that you were in, according to the ignorance of the creator as well as the audience, is one thing, and having a particular racist attitude or a particular worldview is slightly different. And I think that's a difference that these stories have. However, in the initial adventures, I will have to say that in the land of the Soviets, while it has interesting parts in it, is a little too loose. It's a little too shabby and shaggy. The character of Tintin isn't obviously formed yet, and this is to no debt. This is not criticizing a young 21, 22-year-old who wrote an entire adventure comic about places that he hadn't been to, based on reading other books and research. I would say that for me, right at the beginning, Tintin in the Land of the Soviets would fall into the not good category. Now, I know that some people might argue with this, but I am going to sort of, as I said, put these on a scale against each other. And when I look at what is going to come up next, and when I look at the adventures that are there, Land of the Soviets is simply not more than a historical curiosity for me. It's something I can revisit if I want to try to be scholarly, but it's not something, and part of that has to do with the fact that I didn't read it when I was young. I didn't read it until I was in my 30s, I think. I don't believe it was published in English until 1991. I think Tintin in the Congo wasn't published in English until Tintin in the Congo, I think, wasn't published till 91 or 92. Land of the Soviets wasn't published until 99. So this is not something that I grew up with. This is not something most English speakers, and definitely not translated language speakers, grew up with. I think maybe if you speak French and or another European language in which this was available, this just wasn't available in English. It was never done, and I think for the reasons that I'm pointing out, it was never even like the Belgian Congo story. Tintin in the Congo was redrawn, was shrunken down, and was colorized. This was never done for the Land of the Soviets because it just doesn't fit in with the rest of the books. And so therefore, I'm going to start off by putting the very first Tintin book in the not good category. And I think, similarly, I would say Tintin in the Congo is also not very good. In fact, if anything, Tintin in the Congo is probably worse than the Land of the Soviets, even though the Land of the Soviets is an earlier book. And now this is interesting because usually people get better, especially right at the beginning, if your first effort isn't that great. Now this has got nothing to do with popularity. From all accounts, the Tintin in the Land of the Soviets was incredibly popular, and so was Tintin in the Congo. Maybe we know the popularity of the other adventures because it became more and more international, but this is not to say that these were abject failures. The further adventures would not have happened if these initial adventures weren't successful. So they did capture the imaginations of children and were popular with adults as well. But I think that kind of makes it worse when we think about the reasons why we will say that these aren't the best books. So this is Tintin in the Congo, the colorized version, the redrawn version. This comes with a thing that says collector's edition on it, this little piece of paper. It's right on the but it on the cover. And the reason why it's the collector's edition is because this is published by Casterman in its English edition. It's not part of the Egmont box set. So Egmont does not, and that's another interesting thing. Egmont puts this book in the Land of the Soviets, puts this book as part of their box set, but not Tintin in the Congo, because Tintin in the Congo's depictions of Africa and inhabitants, the indigenous people of the Congo, etc., is one of the most criticized things in the entire Tintin oeuvre, as well as its pro-colonial, and in the Land of the Soviets. Sorry, I'm moving over here so that I can use the other camera better. This is the original facsimile edition. So this is what Tintin in the Congo looked like initially, and you'll see it's quite similar to that large panels, all caps writing. And I think in French and many other languages, the lettering has always been all caps. It's only in the English with the high slop hand lettering where you have the sentence case lettering. But Tintin in the Congo is offensive for many reasons. The depiction of black and African populations following the caricature of its times, with the large lips and the broad noses, definitely playing into that sort of caricatured, stereotyped representation. You also have a lot of cruelty to animals, which is another thing this is famous for. And it's not just the kind of thing, and I think I saw in the comments as well, that he blows up a rhinoceros by drilling a hole in the hide of the rhinoceros and dropping a stick of dynamite into it. But I mean, the story is just like in the Land of the Soviets. It's just one gag after another, kind of loosely strung together, hijinks that aren't really very smart writing. It's just kind of ridiculous things happening. You do have animals that talk, and right at the beginning, you've got not just Snowy talking, but a lot of animals talking, and Tintin seems to be able to communicate with them, which makes the sort of killing and the violence against them even worse. But the idea of Tintin as a great hero, as a great admirable character, I think is yet to be born. Right here in these adventures, Tintin is just, he's out in the world, and that's part of his appeal. He's going places and he's seeing things. And of course, that would always continue to be part of the appeal of the series, the sort of globe-trotting nature. Now, I know that in one of my early videos on Tintin, I think I remarked that Steven Spielberg and George Lucas were very influenced by Tintin, and it was pointed out to me in the comments that no, they never actually encountered Tintin. But I think it was Karl Barks that I was thinking of, that they were very influenced by. But it's that same Uncle Scrooge and Tintin. I would think Karl Barks' Uncle Scrooge and Tintin, for me at least, were the formative globe-trotting adventures. The fact that every single adventure took you somewhere else in the world. There might be treasure, there might be historical artifacts, there might be hints of the supernatural. This it's all about discovery. So you have this global approach to adventure, which Tintin baked into its first two stories and sort of templatized it. And you can see a lot of different things in these two stories that you'll see coming up in the further adventures. You'll see a lot of seafaring. You'll see a lot of ships and the kind of architecture or the mapping out of a ship, the upper deck and the lower deck, those kind of things, the portholes. These are things that will come up over and over again. You've got animals and goofy comedy with animals, sometimes Snowy having a little adventure off on his own. There is a lot of interesting things that happen when the Tintin coloring or the redrawing happens, because like we saw with in my other videos, like we saw with Cigars of the Pharaoh, there are anachronisms introduced, like Thompson and Thompson showing up over here right at the beginning, which they're not there. But since this was done after 15 or 12 or something like that adventures had come out, this was tried to be retrofitted in. And whenever this retrofitting thing is attempted in Tintin, where you take these older adventures, then they're redrawn in Herge's contemporary current style, but they also need to fit into things, you'll have things, and I think we'll see them later on as well, you'll have things come up, and that kind of anachronism makes the Tintin in the Congo redrawn version actually less enjoyable to be, because now Tintin looks like the Tintin that we know. The artwork is far more sophisticated than, say, even the Blue Lotus or something like that. If you look at how the figures are, well, I'm wondering if this exposure is a bit much. If you look at how the human as well as animal figures are, they're less. Oh, so I know why this is. I forgot to. There we go. They're far. They look like the later Tintin adventures. They look exactly like that, but his behavior is so weird, and he doesn't. So it's more inconsistent. I'd much rather read this Tintin doing all that stuff, because he's not quite that other Tintin. He might be seen as a prototype or a different character even in some ways. You might think of this as a child's sketchbook before they went on to do the stuff that they're really famous for. But that's why in spite of the redrawn collector's edition being again a good historical artifact, I think that's what both of the Congos are. They're interesting historical artifacts. I'm glad they exist. I'm glad they haven't been banned or made unavailable to buy. I think it's important that they be available to scholars or to collectors, but also to anyone else who wants to know how did even the most popular comic series in the world, beloved by millions across decades, what roots does it have? What did it have that it needed to get rid of? What did it have that reflected the times? And I think that's an important thing to have, and I'm glad that they haven't been erased. There are people who are upset that they're not part of the, say, the Egmont box set, etc. But the Egmont box set is definitely something being made for new readers, to introduce new readers to it, to introduce young readers to it. I read Tintin when I was young and I want to give it to my nephew. It's that kind of a thing. And without the right kind of context, it's I don't think it would be the right thing to do to include Tintin in the Congo in that box set. I'm surprised they include Tintin in the Land of the Soviets. So I'm fine with it not being part of Egmont's mainstream all ages offering, as long as it's available somewhere. But in spite of its historical value, I'm not going to be able to say anything better than not good for Tintin in the Congo. Now that I look at this, I can say that, well, if I'm placing Tintin in the Congo here, I might be indicating that it's slightly better than Land of the Soviets. So I'm actually going to put Land of the Soviets slightly ahead of Tintin in the Congo. So the further to the right something is, the more it might be, the closer it is to the level above it. That's my logic over here. Which makes me think that in spite of me not wanting to rank things and saying that, okay, at least this way I'll just end up with 6 categories, if you follow from the bottom left to the top right, you'll get a ranking if I'm going to rank them within the thing itself. I don't know if I'll keep this up for all the tiers, but at least right down here, I think it's important for me to say that in spite of me putting Land of the Soviets and Tintin in the Congo, the first 2 adventures in the lowest category, in the lowest area, I'm still going to say one's better than the other. So let's say that we are keeping with that, and we're going to move on to the next one. So Tintin in the Congo, not good. Tintin in the Land of the Soviets, Also not good. A little better than Tintin in the Congo, but not good. So Tintin not really off to a great start from my modern or from my 80s, 90s childhood sort of point of view. Not It's not going to be up there. Now we're going to get to Tintin in America, which for many of us, I wouldn't be surprised across the world, would be what we consider the first Tintin adventure. Because, first of all, as I said, The Land of the Soviets and Congo were not published in English until the 90s. So before the 90s, you really had no idea. In fact, the Blue Lotus was something I had no idea existed, because that wasn't published until I think somewhere in the late 70s or early 80s, or didn't start showing up on the back of books, of other books to read, until much later. So Tintin in America was really the very first Tintin adventure that most of us got to know. Now, where would we place Tintin in America? This is an interesting question, and I think over here is where aesthetics and nostalgia are going to come into a good tight clash against each other. Because if I think about Tintin and Tintin in America, Tintin in America is one of those comics that has been redrawn and does have a more modern looking Tintin and a more modern looking sensibility to its art. But it's still early Tintin. Even with the redrawing, I think it's easy to see that this is not as polished as the comics would be later on. It does have questions of representation of indigenous people, as well as of black people, as well as of Chicago gangsters, Hispanic people. I think the same kind of questions can be asked of this as you have of Adventures Before and After. Yet, Tintin in America has one, at least one, if not many, significant leaps above what have come before, and that is the writing is much sharper. That's not necessarily to say the dialogue, but it moves the story along. It's still a little anecdotal. It still kind of flits from caper to caper, from situation to situation. But there are some terrific sequences. This one over here of Tintin climbing across. I don't know about anyone else, but when I first saw the Doug Liman movie, The Bourne Identity, the first one with Matt Damon, and there's a scene in which he has to go out of a window and into another one, and I was like, oh, I guess Doug Liman's read Tintin in America many times, because this was exactly that. This is a thrilling panel. This is, till today, I think, a single panel that gives me it gives me that proper sense of adventure without being overstated. And I think Tintin in America is full of terrific sequences like this. The gangsters dropping the body off into the water at nighttime with the shadow and the light. The mobsters being arrested by the cops hiding in the van of what was it, bootlegged whiskey. Bobby Smiles, the bad guy over here until Al Capone takes over for the second half of the thing. Or although Bobby Smiles is a great villain, Bobby Smiles is one of those villains that I would have liked to see come back. We had a couple of villains come back in more than one adventure, and Bobby Smiles never did, which is unfortunate. There's also the cowboy stuff, which is fantastic. There are good jokes strewn throughout. There are some not so good jokes. There's the Native American sequence, which again might have a lot of cliche and cliche representation, but I think really plays into the reason why this to me is not, and maybe this is just me, maybe to me this is not as problematic and as offensive. Maybe one, because I read it when I was a kid and I didn't realize what was supposed to be problematic, etc. But it has a real sense of adventure. It doesn't have a mean-spiritedness in it, and the way, say, the Native Americans, the indigenous people are represented, Herge's sympathy is definitely on their side. There is a criticism of America, and there's a criticism of how these people have been treated by the white people. There's questions about them at the reservation, and how they are cheated out of their land even now. So there's that part where I think probably the most scathing and biting part of this story, where Tintin strikes oil accidentally, and then is inundated by. I'm trying to find where that. Because I think in the most. Yes, so he discovers oil by setting off this dynamite, and he's immediately inundated by people. They show up like minutes after it has happened in order for him to sign contract, and there is more and more and more people, and the contract gets higher and higher. This is something that was there in Tintin in the Congo, but there it just wasn't called for. Like, he was so famous, he arrived at the Congo, and then reporters or people just started showing up and bidding for the story that he would write. And he was like, no, I'm already committed to my. He just landed in the Congo, and he had a bidding war going on. Over here, he discovers oil, and the money that they're offering goes higher and higher and higher until he says, oh, it's not my land, it's the Native Americans. That's who you should talk to. And they're like, all right, here's $10. You got one day to clear out of here. And then they're moved out by gunpoint. And by the next morning, a city has just sprung up where their land used to be once oil has been discovered. This half a page, or this one page, is biting in its commentary. There is there's similar. I can see how you have. If someone in India was to be offended by the way Tintin is representing India, you could say a lot for the Americans, who might be offended by Tintin showing their land as being a place of automobile graveyards, and where you've got the automation of food to such an extent where this fascinated me as a kid, where a cow goes in. Where is it? Oh, this is mirrored. So where a cow goes in and on a conveyor belt, and sausages come out at the other end. It's definitely not just fun and adventure games. There is definitely some commentary about capitalism. There's commentary about consumerism. There's commentary on the treatment of the Native American people. There's a lot of other stuff going on there. But as a kid, without historical context, they still had their impact, and which is why I think, in spite of it being a little bit more gag filled and a little bit more episodic and a little less tight and a little more loosey goosey, there's the frontier cowboy stuff. And there's, of course, Herge, who wrote about the USSR without having been to the USSR. He wrote about the Congo without having been to the Congo. He's writing about America without having been to America. But there's something different. There's the anti-communist rhetoric in one, and then there's the sort of pro-colonial Congo. But the anti-American nature of Tintin in America isn't completely, because he's still fascinated by Al Capone and Chicago mobsters and the cowboys and the Wild Wild West and the railroads. In spite of trying to be critical, he's still very much buying into that myth, or he definitely wants to work with that myth. And for me as a child, this was one of my introductions. It's funny. It's like thinking of French New Wave cinema as being what introduced you to noir American movies or something like that. It's like my first sense of the Wild West was because of Tintin in America, which is a Franco-Belgian view of the American West, made probably through cowboy movies, just the way that the gangster stuff is made from gangster movies. So there's something so interesting and unique and flavorful about the way that this is done, that I think that I'm going to have to take Tintin in America much higher than I would have thought. I would have thought that it would be in the not bad area, maybe the pretty good area, but to me, it's between pretty good and great. And I think pretty good from the storytelling and from the moving along of the thing, and then there is the great when it comes to the nostalgia and what I feel about Tintin in America because of what I learned from it and how every part of it is seared into my brain. So I don't know. I'm going to put it in great right now. And then as we move along, I think things might come up and say, "Are you really saying this is on the same level as that?" And I might change that. So I'm going to err on the side of my childhood love, and I'm going to say that Tintin America, in spite of being the third adventure really early, I'm going to put up there now. This might be controversial, but I'll make up for it by putting other things that maybe other people love more lower than they would later on and sort of balance out. But yes, I think that the social commentary, the cowboys and Indian stuff, in spite of its cliche nature, just like the gangster stuff, just like the highfalutin society stuff, the machine that makes sausages out of cows, all of these things, I think all of them, the sum ends up being greater than its whole, and it can be a critique of America. But it's one thing to critique Africa as a colonial power and think and depict those the indigenous populations as less than human, and it's another thing altogether to say another group of white people are so funny. It's kind of there's a difference in whether you're punching up or whether you're punching down. It makes a difference to the comedy, and I think Tintin in America, in spite of its critique and criticism and use of cliche, is also it's seduced enough by American storytelling and American myth making that it can try to have its cake and eat it too, in a way, and that really does put it high up there. I'm going to take. I'm going to say goodnight to the Australian folks who are leaving. I'm shocked and very flattered that you're here at 3 a.m. But I'll see you and I'll catch up with you on the recording. So I'm just going to quickly go through the comments to see what I have over here. Wow, we've gone through an hour of this live stream and I'm only through the first 3 books. So I think I'm going to have to pick things up a little. But I think most of you who are on this would have expected this. Bobby Smiles comes back briefly in Red Sea Sharks. Oh my goodness, has it been this long that I have forgotten that? I cannot believe that I do not remember Bobby Smiles coming back. Oh, wow. There are lots and lots of comments over here. I don't know if I'm going to be able to read every one of them. There's a colorized version of Tintin in the Soviet. Yes, I know. I've seen these things where they've just colored the old black and white ones. It's not the redrawn one. And I know that Molanza did the same thing with Tintin in America, etc. I mean, I guess I'm sort of curious, but at the same time, if I was that curious, I would have picked up those copies by now. Soviets is better than Congo. Yes, I think I agree. Sort of historical yes. Congo gets no excuses, Vertical V says, and I think that's the same way. And I think it would be different if it was just by itself what it was. But the fact that it was followed by 20 other books, I think really leaves it no excuses. As in, it's fine. It's a stepping stone, and Herge had to break out of the editorial constraints, and also he was 20-something years old, and the editor of the magazine was telling him what he wanted, etc. It's okay. I don't worry about putting Congo way down at the bottom or Soviets way down at the bottom. I don't worry about it too much. I'm not going to lose any sleep over it. And yes, the dialogue can be unpleasant. The character of Tintin, and this is one of the things that Tintin, to me as a child, and I think to many people, is an ideal. He's the kind of comic book hero that you want kids to have. He's morally upstanding. He stands up for the little guy. He stands up for the persecuted. He's got a strong sense of right and wrong and indignation, and he won't just sit by and do things. He doesn't drink. He doesn't smoke. These are things, as a kid, you were like, oh, what an ideal person. So in the way that Superman, is sort of an idealized person, for young readers, he has a certain aspirational quality to him. The fact that he was a young person, he was a boy reporter in the early stories, is also obviously appealing. You're thinking, oh, boys, I'm a boy. Can I also be on a ship by myself, getting a job as a radio operator? It's you've really got to think about that. Also average, not bad. Yes, I was thinking that before I started making this thing, I was thinking that Tintin in America is probably going to go into the not bad category, stepping up 1, maybe 2 categories, and I think I might take it back down down a little once I look at what else is coming. Um, let's see, anything else? Second and third comic resulted in such a trade. Yeah, so we've definitely got a change in the author from the stories, and I think that Tintin in America already starts showing you the change. Tintin in America being very different in many ways from Land of the Soviets and and uh, and the Congo. Next, we've got Cigars of the Pharaoh. And this, I think, is where the controversy of my tier list might start emerging, because I know that Cigars of the Pharaoh is a favorite for many people. Cigars of the Pharaoh is also considered one of the first. It is, I think, the first two-parter in many ways, although you can see Land of the Soviets kind of lead into Congo, or Congo makes a reference to Land of the Soviets in similar ways. Tintin America originally made a reference to the Congo right on the first page. And the redrawn version of the Congo, in fact, has him being picked up and said, all right, we've got something for you in Chicago, which is really odd because the original version of the Congo didn't have that. So they do have this kind of connection, kind of like the Hardy Boys or something, making a reference to the next adventure or the previous adventure in the last page, on the first page, etc. But Cigars of the Pharaoh had things that happened in it that directly followed in the next one. But by itself, also, it is quite. Let's take a look at it, shall we? Because I've got a feeling when looking at the comments that people will maybe have a disagreement with me on where this should go. And as I said, that's fine. Let's take a look at Cigars of the Pharaoh. Now, this is obviously the redrawn version, and the redrawn version, unlike, say, the Blue Lotus, which we'll look at immediately after this, is a fantastically redrawn version. If you look at this, you are not going to say that this is one of the early Tintin stories. And I think this page right here is a good representation of that. You've got Tintin in this blue turtleneck thing, very similar to what he's got in the Black Island, I think. You've got Senor Oliveira, what was his name? Figuera, looking absolutely like he does in the later adventures. At the same time, you've got this weird gag in which Tintin, who was absolutely shipwrecked and on this boat and picked up in the ocean, ends up being sold a whole bunch of stuff by this Portuguese salesman. And then he's just carting all this stuff around. So where did he get the money from? Where is he going to put all this stuff? Where is he going to take it? It's just a gag, so you have a gag. These kind of gags would become rarer as the series went on. The way that Snowy talking to Tintin and Tintin understanding him would be something that's gone. There'll be occasional things that'll be that kind of that non sequitur, out of nowhere stuff. But for the most, this becomes a much more straightforward adventure. Cigars of the Pharaoh also is probably the first one with a very tight arcing story in which you are constantly moving from one set piece to another, sort of because of the plot and because of the characters, which is not to say you don't have little side comedy excursions. Probably the most bizarre of them is when he gets to India. He just flies to India from Mecca. It's Mecca in the original. In the redrawn version, it's just a city that he goes to. But from there, he gets on a crop duster plane and keeps flying until he runs out of fuel, and then he's in India. So good flying. But then he meets this elephant, and then he goes and finds some quinine, and he feeds the elephant, and the elephant gets better. And then the elephant's talking to him, and then he fashions a horn out, and then he starts communicating with the elephants because he picks up their vocabulary. There's this entire page dedicated to him, like, oh, this must be the verb and things like that. So there are things over here, and for those of you who are interested, I do have a separate video on the Cigars of the Pharaoh edition comparison with the original. So the idea of Rastapopulus over here, he says, we've met before. He hasn't met Rastapopulus before. There is a prototypical Rastapopulus in Tintin in America, right at the last scene where he's at that sort of dinner with the Hollywood actress Mary Pickford and things like that. And they're like, oh, that's Rastapopulus, etc. But because of Thompson and Thompson, because of Rastapopulus, even at the beginning of Cigars of the Pharaoh, and this is one of those things where he's giving Snowy the itinerary of where they're going, and they're going to go to Bombay and then Colombo and move on. And Snowy says something like, "I'd rather be in Marlinspike." And Marlinspike is obviously the home that Captain Haddock ends up buying or inheriting after the adventures of the Red Rackham's treasure and Secret of the Unicorn. So that's he hasn't even met Captain Haddock here. But because this was redrawn after those stories had been published, there are all these little references and things that create these anachronisms and friction. It is a fantastic redrawing for the most. There is no doubt that the artwork in it is superb, and the story is also quite tense. Especially the nautical parts of it are great adventure. And anytime you have jungles and greenery, it's a good time. You've got several things over here that look very similar to later adventures, like the Black Island with the trains and the walls and the trees and the jumping that you can see over here. But overall, it's a lot looser in many ways than what would come later, but it's a lot tighter than what has come before. So in that way, I think it's something that, oops, I'm not sure if this is my audio. Oh, there we go. In many ways, I think it's tighter than it's much. Obviously, it's much better than what has come in the Congo and Soviets. But I would not put it at the same level as Tintin in America. Although I know many people who would say Cigars of the Pharaoh is a much more mature, is a much more complex. It's a less gag filled. It's a less episodic story than. Sorry, I was on the wrong screen. Is a lot more episodic than Cigars of the Pharaoh, and Cigars of the Pharaoh leads straight into the next one in many ways, although it definitely has an ending. I would not go as far as great and Tintin in America. I would put it in pretty good. Now, should Tintin in America be in pretty good? Should Tintin in America actually be behind Cigars of the Pharaoh? These are things for discussion. But for right now, I'm putting Tintin in America in great and Cigars of the Pharaoh in pretty good. And you can discuss if this is something you disagree with. I suspect this will be something that people will disagree with me on, but that's fine, because as I said right at the beginning, you can make your own tier list and let me know why. And of course, you can put it in the comments below. We are reading Britishized versions, Sleepy Reader. I just saw that comment because there are a lot of, crikey and things like that. A lot of like British terms in the language that strike me as kind of odd and funny. At the same time, you'll have a European, maybe someone from South America, and then they'll say something like, "Oh, you're a real caution," and things like that. So there are British terms, and some of them are a lot more British than some others that are there, and I think that's kind of funny as well. But Cigars of the Pharaoh, as Felix says in the comments, is the first big mystery with a lot of plot, and that is why it goes up higher. Tintin in America, I will say, does not have the kind of plot that Cigars of the Pharaoh does, but Tintin in America feels slightly more effervescent to me, whereas with Cigars of the Pharaoh, particularly the redrawn version, I think the gravity and the kind of hardcore adventure is getting more baked in, particularly that sort of mystery and that unraveling and that investigation. However, I still think we're still in that realm of the ex machina and the coincidence and the ridiculous, timing of things. Those kind of things still are in the story, helping Tintin out, or just providing a clue, or magically, taking care of a certain thing. The things that I think got even more smoothened out later. ULFK says Tintin in America is just not bad. Cigars is great. Yeah, absolutely. I can see that, and I can completely understand why. They're definitely two different kinds of adventures. And once again, over here, I might very well be leaning on childhood nostalgia, in which Tintin in America made a really deep impression on me compared to Cigars of the Pharaoh. I will say that the desert landscape and the the Bedouin outfits and the camels and the rifles in the desert. I love that stuff, and the parts of Cigars of the Pharaoh that have that are terrific. But as we will see, I think they are done better and they get better and better as we go along with the series, because that's not the last time we're going to see deserts or forests or India. I will say that I should be more biased towards Cigars of the Pharaoh, because so much of that story takes place in India, but it's kind of like a generic India. I mean, even the brief glimpses of India in further adventures were a little bit more. This is a Maharaja's place, and there's a fakir, etc., etc. And it's all. I mean, I get it, but it doesn't appeal to me at the same level. So, if you're biased because it's the first one you read, that's exactly the kind of thing I'm talking about. This is why these kind of tier lists are interesting, because there'll be some of it that's analytical and some of it that's purely emotional. Speaking of which, the Blue Lotus, which would be the fifth adventure, which in some ways is very similar to Congo and Soviets, as I was saying, where I wasn't even aware that this book existed for a long time. Now, it did become something that I did read in my childhood, but it wasn't the first part of my Tintin reading. It was a later part of my Tintin reading in my childhood, because it wasn't on the, like when you've got the backs, there are several copies here. There are several copies from my childhood where the back won't, come into focus. What's going on? Yes, there are several copies that won't even include the Blue Lotus or Soviets. And of course, they won't there till the 90s. But there are copies out there from Methuen, from Magnet, that didn't have the Blue Lotus, because the Blue Lotus wasn't published in English until much later. So here we have what I think most people, most Tintin fans would call the first masterpiece of the series. Now, Cigars of the Pharaoh might be a masterpiece for many people. Tintin in America, there might be people like me who really enjoy that sort of adventure. I don't know if anyone's ever going to say or would have ever said that Soviets or Congo are masterpieces, but the Blue Lotus is many people's absolute favorite Tintin. Many people would say this is where Herge's maturity as a storyteller, this is where Tintin as an empathetic character, both someone who has empathy for people and for someone who you care about, were born. And while we have seen traces of that before, that's quite true. Tintin and the Blue Lotus has within it a friendship and a sort of stranger in a strange land quality that is different from the others. It's no less exoticizing and fetishizing a foreign country the way that others have, but there's something about depiction of China over here that seems a lot more accurate, probably because of the amount of research. And although there has been research, it's not like he didn't read anything about America or the Soviet Union or the Congo when he wrote those books. But the research over here, the kind of relationships that he developed, the personal connection, even though he never visited China himself, make this, for many people, a superlative adventure. And I can completely see it. I get it. I understand why. It's starting from this iconic red cover, which has this dragon thing, which I know more than one person, by the way, who has this dragon as a tattoo. So it's iconic in the true sense of the word. This has started representing this series, this adventure, and everything from the first page. And this is one of those that was really confusing to me as a child, because you see the first few pages of the Blue Lotus were redrawn later on to match the current style. But that redrawing was kind of let go of after, I think, the first 3 or 4 pages. So the subsequent pages sort of remained the way they were. Certain panels, like notably this one, they were expanded to become larger, to include more art. But you can already see the leap that this series takes. with its artistic presentation. And the negative depiction over here of say the Chinese people or even the Japanese people is there. It's there. I will not say that they aren't presented, whether it's having a certain accent or dressing in certain clothes or having a particular speech mannerism, but they're also heroic characters. They're also good guys. They're also on the side of the good guys. They're not stupid. They're intelligent. In fact, a lot of the Europeans are shown to be more conniving, and of course, you've got a loutish American that Herge does like to throw in from time to time. But yes, there is a bit of a negative depiction of the Japanese, but that's a political kind of thing. At the same time, you do have some questions about whether Snowy is going to be cut up and eaten or not, and whether one thing I will note is that these soldiers in China, the British, are Sikh soldiers, Indian. And as a kid, it did amuse me that the three tough cops who were sent to beat Tintin were Sikhs. Of course, it was them who get beaten up. And this is another one of those things where I think early on you'll have this thing of where a tiger will jump into uh, into a place with Tintin, and there'll be a scuffle, and Tintin will have bound up the tiger and put a piece of wood in its mouth. Or here there are three burly Sikhs who come in to beat up Tintin, and he beats them up instead. How? Is he super strong? Is he, it's just kind of just, he's supposed to be in those things, but in later adventures, that sort of superhuman quality disappears. He becomes much more about his heart and his intelligence and his getting out of situations, his quick thinking, and these kind of ridiculous, I don't really know how this happened, sort of things do disappear. So it's not like the Blue Lotus doesn't have them, but you've got a nighttime explosion, something that we see again in later adventures. I always enjoyed the way the color comics depicted explosions, particularly at night. There's something about that dark thing with the black thing, and there are so many, page after page, sequence after sequence over here. Even the gags and the jokes of the rubber knife being substituted, things like that. There are ex machina things. There are coincidences, the kind of things that in the early adventures happened a lot more, as I was saying. But it's a great story. There's a nice friendship in the middle of it. Tintin does have a little bit of that white savior thing going on, but again, given the time of this story, it's surprisingly not that condescending. I mean, it's only just a little condescending, and it's in many ways, I think, the artistic presentation. In fact, there's a little bit, I think, that is quite smart, because here, when you have Thompson and Thompson, they're like, okay, we're going to go to China. We have to find Tintin. We've got to blend in. Let's dress up like them. And then they put on this outfit that makes them a laughing stock of everyone following them around, because their ideas of what Chinese costumes, I'm sorry, clothes and outfits and hairstyles are so cliche and so so ridiculous that it's a joke, and it's a joke in the comic itself. So I think there's stuff like that tells you that this is smarter than just saying, oh, the exotic East, etc. It's difficult with these comics. It's difficult to say, is this racist? But I come back down to that question of superiority, that question of condescension, and to me, that doesn't really exist. As I said, there's the slight white savior thing, but he's the hero, and he is going to be involved in things, and he has a lot of help. A lot of people help him out, and this is something that I think the Tintin Adventure started incorporating into it. It wasn't just him doing every single thing. He made friends along the way. He showed kindness. He helped people out. In this, I think there's a European who's beating up his taxi driver, his rickshaw driver, and Tintin snatches his cane away from him. He's obviously I think he's European or he's American. I thought I just found, right. So it was right there over here, and it's a famous scene in which you've got that beating taking place, and then Tintin stepping in and breaking his stick and saying, "Brute." this thing over here. So I think all in all, the Blue Lotus is a good adventure. It's quite a lot of fun, but it has an aesthetic sensibility, whether it's about its what have I done? Yeah, there we go. Um, it has an aesthetic sensibility, its sense of design, its fidelity to things like architecture and clothes. It's got some commentary about Japanese aggression. There's stuff about the Boxer Rebellion. There's stuff about opium, but it doesn't completely escape the cliche and the kind of exoticization that you have in these stories. And at the same time, I don't find it, again, it's just my point of view, I don't find it offensive from the point of view of condescension. It's not trying to say some things or some people are lower or inferior the way that some of the earlier stories may have indicated. And at the same time, it does have a looseness to it that isn't as tight as some other stories will happen, will make it so. But I will still say that this is something that I would put on the great area. Now, this is controversial because most people might put this at the excellent level or the sublime level. I've definitely, as I said, heard of people for whom the Blue Lotus is their favorite Tintin adventure, is the absolute best. I may have read this later in life and maybe it's that nostalgia thing, but I don't know if I'm going to be able to place it higher than great. And maybe this is a fault of mine. Maybe I don't value the early stories as much as some people do. And that's because of me having read all of them and created my opinions based on looking at all of them, even as a child. If I'd read them separately and had long gaps, I might have created an individual identity that would allow some of these to be higher up. I know that some people are not happy about Cigars of the Pharaoh being in the pretty good area and Tintin America being in great. Blue Lotus might be in excellent, but I'll put it at the top end of great for now. It's definitely superior to Tintin in America. It might be in the excellent category, but we'll see. A comic that it's a product of its time. I see a comment over here. Because and I know this can be said about a lot of different things, but I think a product of its time can also be different things. A product of its time can is you know announce superiority, can proclaim hate, can advocate for laws or behavior that are oppressive. Just because something is a product of its time, for me, everything is kind of a product of its time. The fact that certain things are timeless, I think what makes them masterpieces, that it didn't matter if this was written in the 18th century, it had enough humanity to say this is wrong. And it didn't matter if most of the people around you or the laws said it was right. There was somebody who thought it was wrong at a human level, and that's what makes that work timeless, because in spite of what was around that. And that's another one of these things, is I think that we do think that this is the way people thought then, this is the way people think now. And it's never, I don't think it's ever that black and white. It's a question of majority, and it's a question of critical mass, and it's a question of what's in the laws. But there were always people who thought it was wrong, and there are still people who think it is right. And it's just the numbers change, and what is acceptable to do in public, what is acceptable to do in your workplace, those things change. But there isn't a period of time in which everyone thought this was correct and nobody thought it was wrong. There were people who thought it was wrong. There were people who felt it was incorrect, but they weren't the people who had the voice. They weren't the people who were publishing things. So those things change because of the conversation around them, and because of art, and because of conversation around art. So I do know that I don't want things erased, and I don't want to pretend like they never happened or people didn't say or do those things. At the same time, I don't want to say all of this is fine because, it was a different time and people thought differently. You're like, yes, I mean, but it wasn't absolute, and we still would want to recognize that, I think. So I will put that high, but maybe others will put that higher. Um, And then, yes, so products of times do not exist in isolation from dissenting views that also existed then. Yes, yes. So again, I'm not talking about which views. I don't want to get into like what's right and wrong. I just think that just by being a product of one time, that's just the beginning of the conversation. That's not the conclusion of the analysis or the review of it. That's one of the things you factor in. You're like, okay, this book was written in the 1930s. This book was written in the 1940s in Europe by a white man. All right, keep all of these things in mind and then say, this was a product of 1940s upper middle class white European men. And then it's a different kind of statement than saying of its time, because what were people in Papua New Guinea thinking in the 1930s is obviously not what we're saying right there. But let's get back to our chart. We are now at the broken ear. And this may be, I don't know. Will this be controversial? Because I don't like the broken ear. I'm not a big fan. I've never been a big fan. It's a bit of a loose, shaggy dog kind of story. The jokes in it are not really top class. The adventure in it starts off nicely, but it's too spelled out. It holds your hand all the time. So there's just a little too much exposition. There's too much looseness. Let me get it out here. And the broken ear is also very important because it introduces some people like General Alcazar. It introduces Pablo. I Am I missing someone? It introduces a couple of other things, but it also shows us certain things that we'll see again. It shows us the lightning. Hold on, let me move to my. It shows us things like this lightning and people getting their clothes ripped and things like this that we'll see again in a few other adventures. You see Tintin using his environment. But in general, like at the beginning, there is this statue that is stolen and then it is returned. And then, oh, it's a mystery, and people are like, okay, it was just a prank. But Tintin notices that the ear was broken of the original statue, and what's been returned, it doesn't have that broken ear, so it must be a fake. Now, first of all, that's kind of like, I mean, it's a museum, and if you have something stolen, I think you will, you know, that boy reporter in the audience is not going to be the only person who notices that this statue is not broken. But okay, leaving all of this apart, it takes a long time for us to figure out what's going on. Like, why do people want this fetish and why are they behind it? And while that kind of slow burn mystery is something Tintin does really well in many other adventures, in this one, once you have the parrot reveal the thing that the parrot reveals. So up to this point, I think, you know, up to page 12, I think it's fun. There is a murder that's been committed, and then there's this mystery of the stolen thing, and the parrot is the only witness, and then there are these two people who have stolen the parrot, and the whole thing is about trying to get the parrot and try to figure out what the parrot knows. And once you do that, you've got a couple of other cleverish subversions, but then the story kind of, and don't get me wrong, the South America portion of it is one of those places where you get a little bit of that glimmer of that satire, like we saw in Tintin in America, with the oil page. You've got this execution page right here, in which Tintin is going to be executed, and then there's a revolution. And so then they're like, Viva General Alcazar. So then he's spared. And then the revolution fails. And then so he's going to be shot again. And so then you have these, the people on the firing line, the people who are going to execute him, just keep celebrating different people as the government changes. And then the guns don't have the right ammunition, and it's been sabotaged by the revolution. So they go out and get drunk. And when he's drunk and he's going to be executed, he's, you know, praising General Alcazar, and then the revolution does take place the third time lucky, and then he's hailed as a hero for being on the firing line. And still, I mean, it's all very funny. I really like these two pages, but this entire South America episode then after that with Alcazar, and there's this stuff about war and the weapons of war being sold to both sides, and again, corporate European American interests. So it's the American oil companies versus the British oil companies, and who can take over the South America. And it would have been fantastic if that was sort of the driving force of the story, or more a major part of the story. And General Alcazar then turns against Tintin, and so then he's not a sympathetic, like, hero's friend anymore. So in some ways, this entire middle section of it, in spite of the satire and in spite of the commentary it has on war, ends up being just a little diversion before we can get back to the story of this fetish and why people want it. And it's just such an extended sequence. Again, you've got interesting things happening in it, like the train chase sequence, like the car crashing. You have the soldiers descending to check the car, something that I always liked, that kind of view, and it's something that we see again in other adventures. So all the planes, trains, automobile stuff is great, but it doesn't really amount to much. It ends up being a thing that takes place in 3 or 4 different scenarios, and then he goes off into the forest and meets the Darumbaya tribe and Ridgewell, the explorer, and all of it is kind of interesting and kind of not really interesting. I just did not find myself very interested in The Broken Ear. The mystery isn't that great, and although it has parts and pieces and glimmers of things that are interesting, I think almost everything that is good in The Broken Ear shows up somewhere else better, whether it is the forests, and whether it's the chase sequences, whether it's the every factor that is worthwhile. And I'm not saying there isn't anything worthwhile in it, there is, but every factor that is worthwhile is something that is better done in another adventure, and is more polished, is more smooth, and more integrated into an overarching story. So over here, I will say The Broken Ear will be a not bad for me. It's not going to be at the level of Tintin in the Congo, or it's obviously much more polished. It's more baked. And there are moments of comedy. There are moments of satire. If I was feeling generous, I would put it in pretty good, but I would definitely put Cigars of the Pharaoh. Cigars of the Pharaoh itself might go up. Tintin in America might come down. Blue Lotus should maybe be an excellent, but I mean, it's already 11 o'clock and I'm not even halfway through. So I'm going to stick to my guns, and I'm going to go with what my nostalgia tinged sort of rankings have been about. But I think The Broken Ear, in spite of it being something, even as a child, and I think something of it might have something to do with the redrawing, because although redrawn, it still looks like an older Tintin. It also feels like an older Tintin, and that is reflected in the art as well as the pacing. Now, there are parts where the art is terrific, but it's kind of a mixture. When we get into the middle Tintins and later, is just superbly consistent. Every page, every panel, etc. And the Broken Ear, in particular, I think there's something about it that irritates me, is that it probably has the most number of flat backgrounds that any Tintin adventure has. And if that's not right, do let me know. But like, look at this page. This page over here. My microphone. This page is all green backgrounds, but they're in the forest. But it's strange, and it's off-putting. And particularly when you look at, you're coming off of the Blue Lotus, for heaven's sake. So especially in comparison for what we've been seeing, even where we do have trees, etc., they're not. I mean, a couple of these panels up here are good, but for the most, it's just a single solid color background, and that happens more and more in places. And although in some places you can see a nice watercolor effect to that, it's not enough. And I think, especially when you go into the forest, and here's another part where it's not in the forest, but you'll see that again in this page, a lot of flat backgrounds, not a lot of detail. So in that way, it really comes across as a much earlier story. And even with the redrawings, or even with the adjustments, I think it's not it's not as impressive as it should be, or as we are used to at this point of time. So that's where I will have to. That's where I'll have to put the broken year in not bad. I'm going to put it in not bad because I'm not saying it's as bad as the first two, but honestly, it's my least favorite. And if I wasn't counting Soviets and if I wasn't counting Congo in the way, because I never read them when I was a kid, they weren't published until the 90s, I would probably say, and as it's probably going to be the lowest ranked one on this list. So a little bit of a spoiler alert. Spoiler alert for those of you for whom 1 hour 40 minutes is enough and you're not going to give this live stream any more time. For those of you just joining us, welcome. I hope those of you who are here from the beginning are enjoying this. I am kind of going off. I've come back to the comments every now and then, but there's a lot of um, yeah, so Felix says broken year is important. Yeah, now what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to leave out historical importance, except for historical importance for me, because while a character being introduced and a first appearance and the first use of something is good for us, it's only notable in the round. It's only notable when you look at everything and sort of judge it according to that. On a case by case basis, on an individual basis, the comparisons would be along the lines of plot and character and thrill. And of course, what we have as our individual. I see someone saying Tintin America in excellent is ridiculous. I understand. I hear what you're saying. I know where you're coming from, but to me, I think of it very, very fondly. And as I said, I might change that. But I think we have done with some difficult, controversial things right now. We will continue to have controversy, but from now on, I think it's all good fun controversy because I think we have now come to um, this tier list about 100-year comics is tearing us apart. Yes, it absolutely is. No, I think it's fine. I mean, like, as long as we don't make any personal comments, etc., etc. I think it's fun to argue about these things. I think it's fun to talk about these things. Now, about the countries, I think someone mentioned over here. It's like we are making fun of certain countries over here. I think there is South America. It's just like the whole continent is treated as if it's one country. So of course you're going to make up some countries. I do like the Sildavia, Bordoria countries that come up later, and I maybe it's because, and I think this is similar to something I was saying earlier about punching up and punching down. And I know that this is really a really blasé way of putting it, but at the same time, you've got to think about what the history is. Now, when you've got two European powers that are sort of equal in their economics, in their finances, in their military power, so on and so forth, I think looking at the US oil company and the British oil company might be indulging in stereotype about Americans and Britishers. It might be indulging in stereotype of the greedy American businessman or the loutish tourist and things like that. But it's not the same thing as making a statement about a stereotyped brown servant or a person who is subservient and a darker skinned and wearing half the clothes that you're wearing and using language of servitude because it's a colonial atmosphere. I think even though you could say this is a cliche and that's a cliche, this is a stereotype and that's a stereotype, there's a difference in those two stereotypes because they have different contexts of power structures. So I don't think they're always the same, but I do like it when countries are made up. When countries are made up, it takes the pressure off a little bit of comparing to a real country. Of course, you can still say, but this is supposed to be that country and it's supposed to be directly that way. But it gives a little bit of a cushion. It gives a little bit of plausible deniability. But of course, the intention is always going to be clear. I think it just I don't know. There's something about fiction that ends up like if you tell the lies properly, you can get to the truth a little better than trying to tell the truth. So you try to make it, and then you're worried about controversy. Change the name of the country and say what you want to say, and then maybe you can be satirical in a way. But yes, like Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Europe, I may not know much about that. So therefore, I may not have an idea that this is something that is referencing something that other readers, European readers, for example, would be aware of. So in one of my asterisk videos, somebody said, these are all references to Parisian or French outlooks at the time. And I was like, wow, I had no idea. I was just looking at this as a joke. But of course, someone from France will be able to see something in it that I won't be able to see something in it. And that's way, I'll react to India being represented in a Tintin comic differently than I will to China or Japan. It's just automatic. It's because I know India. I'm just like, oh, what are you talking about, etc. And they might be doing the same thing with any other country they're presenting, but I'll just have a different view on it because I will see that, and I will have a history of like, oh my God, I'm so tired of India being represented in just this way or that way, or as soon as you show someone, they've got to have a turban and this, that, and the other. I'll have my own baggage as far as certain things are concerned, and that's why I think another way of these tier lists, is giving us that, is that what are you offended by is an important thing to note. Not because you are right and I am wrong and I am right and you are wrong, but it's just like these are points of views. I wouldn't know about Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia, and I wouldn't know about England and France until someone told me, and I wouldn't know if someone is, finds this problematic or why they find it problematic. It's the conversation that will let me know that it's important, the size of the lips and the size of the nose. These are not things I knew at 9 years old or 10 years old when I was reading these comics. But anyway, someone says a thorough study of world history enables one to enjoy. I think a thorough study of anything helps your enjoyment of a lot of different things. I do think, however, that I saw in the comments somewhere that I do think that there are ways of looking at things without looking at another level. That just depends on the craft of the storyteller. If the storyteller is able to write an adventure story that's also a political satire, but they are able to write it in such a way that you can enjoy it only as an adventure story and you don't need to understand the political satire to enjoy that, that's great. That's fantastic. But if your adventure story needs the political satire to fuel it, that's a different level of craft. So I think the Tintin adventures do have, every now and then they will have questions about exoticism and questions about this kind of foreign view of things. But at the same time, not only is it a product of its time, but it's also trying to do an adventure story and saying what's odd to my readers. It's not some story that you would write today because your readers know more and they are aware of more, but you're trying to do storytelling of interest and oddness, etc. So which brings us to the Black Island, which I have to say is one of my favorite Tintin adventures. It is one of the early ones. It is a redrawn one, and it's something that I did not know was redrawn. And one of the reasons why I love the Black Island was its art. And when I saw the original Black Island, I was completely astonished because every single thing that I had loved as far as art was something that was brought in later. And this is, I think, the book that made me realize just how terrific a contribution the collaborators of Herge had made to the series, because so much of this was brought in by Bob de Moor, I think, who was sent to England and I think to Scotland as well, to redraw backgrounds, and everything from the phone booths to the uniforms to the trains were redrawn by him to accurately represent the way it looked like in England, not the way that Herge had drawn it 20 years ago. So because of the English reprint demands by the English publishers, this adventure was redrawn. That's the adventure that I grew up with, and I thought it was fantastic. I thought it was fabulous. I know some people have a problem with the gorilla right at the end, and I will admit it doesn't really look much like a gorilla even today to me, and that part of it is a little odd, and you've got a couple of the last vestiges of the old Tintin storytelling and those gags, but apart from that, the adventure moves along at a terrific pace. It makes good use of Thompson and Thompson comedy. There is a nice unraveling and moving forward and little bit revealing, little bit more. And it's really, really good. And in my opinion, it is good enough to put at the excellent level. I would maybe put it at great. No, I am going to put it at excellent. Tintin in America may move from excellent down to great, but the Black Island, I believe, is firmly, for me, in the excellent category. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I do have a separate video on the Black Island, but there's just a couple of different things that I'd like to point out. Um, it starts with Tintin getting shot. Terrific. Good start. He pulls himself out of the hospital bed and sets himself off to find out what happened. And he's immediately framed for robbery, which is unusual, to say the least. But the detectives arrest him, and they've got to, and they can't do anything about it. But from these 2 pages, I mean, the story's already moving along. The train is fantastic, and I want to point out, for me as a child, this glove over here, it's not going to focus because the camera's on manual focus over here. This glove over here with the seams and the stitching available, the pulling the emergency brake. This is where I think I fell in love with Tintin, as in just the details of it, the art of it. And again, this is something from the redrawing. So this comic to me contains a level of detail and a level of texture. Every single bit of it. The English countryside, I guess they're still in England when he's at this pub, it's beautiful, and there's the backgrounds, the angles, all of it is fantastic. And then you've got this gag with the goat, and at the same time it comes at a fantastic, like you had that little where he was climbing up the wall. This is another one of those scenes. It's one of those long panels. And that's another one of the reasons why I didn't want to use the Lake of Sharks at all, is because it doesn't have this kind of panel construction. It doesn't create these scenes. It has a lot more close-ups because it's from a movie, but this cliff scene, it's terrific. It's fantastic. It sets up the danger. It sets up the place. And then you've got the little bit of comedy with the goat, but it is a rescue. And then the rescue leads him to find these clues, and where he comes upon the estate of Mueller. I mean, the story moves along. Every single gag that there is, even the comedy with the magpie and the thing, there's a sense of tension because Tintin is trapped in a burning house, he's knocked out by the chloroform. The entire magpie and the things, it's very funny, but there is this larger tension. And then Mueller cuts the pipe so that they can't get him. And then the bag loads of money. I loved the bag loads of money as a kid. Well, anyway, every single part of it, even looking at this right now, I'm tempted to start reading this book in the middle. Every single sequence, the vehicles, the trains, planes, and automobiles, and then of course when he gets to Scotland, where he's got the kilt and the entire outfit. There's so many words. This is another thing about the Black Island, because I read it early and because I read it as young as I was. So much of my vocabulary has come from the Black Island. I mean, but so many words I learned for the first time in the word forger is something that I first learned about in the Black Island. A number of those things. Chloroform, I think I learned about at the Black Island. A kosh, which is a black kind of weapon, I learned about. I mean, so I could make a list of words, but the story and the setting and the reveals, the bad guys, the sense of adventure. There's that one thing in which when he's being chased and suddenly he's an old man with a beard. It's like one of the last times you'll see something like that. Where did he get a beard from in the middle of a chase? How did he suddenly set himself up inside this house with a hat? How did he disguise himself so perfectly? Even the ridiculous thing of where we've seen earlier, where Thompson and Thompson just kind of like show up at the end of the adventure. In this one, they're trying to get to the end of the adventure, but they've got this entire plane thing that happens as a completely comic stuff, but it's also integrated because it shows up on the TV in which, this is being broadcast. And the original, it was a radio. It wasn't even a television, because the original was written before televisions were that common. But everything is memorable, everything is exciting. And although the ending for some people is considered a letdown, I thought it was fantastic. I thought it was a great way to say, oh, there's something spooky and haunted, and it's not, and it's a gang of forgers. It's very Enid Blyton in many ways, with a little cliff and the rising levels of water inside the things. All of which to say that for me, the Black Island belongs in the excellent category. Moving on, and they do win the flying tournament. Yes, the Thompson and Thompson winning the flying tournament is another icing on the cake. But again, that comedy plays into the story, even though it's kind of out of the story. Next up, we have King Ottokar's Scepter, which is a comic that I read later on in my childhood, even though it was in my childhood, and it has to be one of the most gorgeous Tintin adventures. And from the early stories, from the view of opulence, obviously because Tintin is traveling to another country, this is beautiful to look at. In almost every scene you will have terrific art. You've got some great set pieces, but what I really like about it is the setup. First of all, you've got the mystery of the professor. Then you've got all these people, as you will have very often in Tintin. Everyone's converging on something. Everyone's interested in this one thing, and you're going to have to try to find out why, what makes it so interesting. And the fact that Tintin starts observing things, and like in earlier adventures, what happens is Tintin sees something and immediately tells you what it is and immediately tells you why it's off. Over here, you'll have him go question and how odd, and you'll find out later what he thought was really odd. And this is something quite deft. It's cinematic in its narrative, where the character registers one thing and you as the reader are slightly behind, or you'll find out a little later. It's not as expository and as spelled out, although of course it continues to be that way for the reader, and I really enjoyed that. The most memorable thing, perhaps, is the brochure in that he reads on the plane, which is about the country of Sildavia right here. And this 3-page brochure inside this thing, this little bit of meta fiction over there, is superb. I think many people I know consider this their favorite part of the book, where they've got these recreation of these medieval illustrations and giving you a history of the country. And I am not a fan of big blocks of text in the middle of my comics. Even the first time I read Watchmen, I ignored all the text. It wasn't until the second time that I did. But this, I read the text because it was captivating in that way. So this reminds me of The Mansions of the Gods, the Asterix adventure that has a little 2-page brochure in it. Also a great favorite of mine. But yes, terrific stuff with the scepter. And then, of course, you've got all the stuff of the border. You've got the Sildavian and the Bordurian kind of locals and their culture. And for me, again, in India, this stuff was beautiful to look at. The costumes, again, I keep saying costumes as if it's a Halloween thing. The clothes that they wear, and the farmland and the wagons, the horses, all of these things, just fantastic. I had no idea which country this was. You've got Castafiore showing up over here. You've got the military, and now you're beginning to see a pattern. Tintin and the military. It's an interesting relationship that he has. But of course, the key thing is the scepter and the crown jewels that the professor has come to study. So what ends up happening over here, and I'm not going to spoil it, but the twists and turns of this, I think, are great. I'm a big fan of the twin part of it. I'm a big fan of how the scepter was stolen. I'm a big fan of how it got out of that room. I think all of those little tricks that they have is solid storytelling. It's wonderful placement, European travel. I am going to have to put this one kind of high up. And the funny thing is, I don't think it was that much of a favorite of mine when I was a child. I think the complexity of it, or the simple complexity of it, is something, it wasn't as pyrotechnical as some of the other adventures. So it took me some time to warm up to King Ottokar's Scepter. But as an adult, and upon reading it, I find it to be, I think, somewhere between great and excellent. It's still early, and it's the fact that it isn't pyrotechnical does mean at certain parts it's kind of subdued, and it doesn't have the rollicking pace and the sort of breathlessness or the kind of excitement of something we haven't seen before. I'm going to put it at great, and it's a tough call. I think the Blue Lotus might be a little bit, but again, am I reacting to peer pressure? Am I the historical significance and the art jump and the detail research jump, or should I go with how I feel when I look at the King Ottokar Scepter, which I have to say is a prettier book to look at than the Blue Lotus, maybe just because of the art being more advanced. But the way that the lands of Sildavia is created, the way the history of it is created, and the way that every space that the characters inhabit. I think King Ottokar's Scepter and the Black Island are the two which started giving me a sense of being transported to places, not just transported to lands, but transported to laboratories and showrooms, or like every room and every place, Mueller's mansion, etc. These things started feeling like significant places in which these characters are living and inhabiting, and where the action is taking place. And I think that's where my appreciation of comic storytelling also was born, is that it could transport me not just to another country or another place, not to another planet and things like that, not just science fiction and fantasy, but it could create a sense of a realistic world that I believe is out there somewhere, but I'm not able to inhabit it, but I can inhabit it in the comic. It's that kind of realism that it gave that I really think puts the Black Island and King Ottokar's Scepter that high up on my list for me. Tintin in America right next to the Black Island might make you revise America being so high up, Ashweta asked. That's a very good question, Ashweta. I mean, this is what I was afraid of. I was afraid of those comparisons, Now, am I going to say Tintin in America is the same as the Black Island? And I am saying Tintin in America is better than the Blue Lotus. So then I would drop this by almost, oops, I'm on the wrong screen. I should then maybe bring Tintin in America here? Is that what I'm saying I should do? And then should Cigars of the Pharaoh go higher? And should it come up here? No, I'm going to... Should Cigars of the Pharaoh come... So I have 4 great and nothing pretty good. No, I'm going to say, of what I've looked at so far, Cigars of the Pharaoh is the one I'm putting at pretty good. And Black Island I'm putting in excellent. So thank you, Ashweta. Because of you, I have now downgraded Tintin in America by 2 steps. But moving on to the next one. And the next one in the list is The Crab with Golden Claws. Now, this is probably one of the most famous, and at the same time, I have heard people say this is their favorite. So just like the Blue Lotus, there are some people out there who say The Crab with the Golden Claws is their favorite comic, is the favorite Tintin. I will say it's one of my favorite covers. I will say that this cover, especially this blue, is beautiful. And a very long time ago, maybe my second computer maybe, I had a desktop background which was an extended version of this image. It didn't have any writing on it, it just had them, but the desert just kind of continued, for your monitor. And I think I had that background for years. Like, I changed computers and I would put on that background. So this image as a single image is probably the one image, just from it being my desktop background for like 5 years. I think the thing that I have looked at, the part of the image from a Tintin comic that I have seen the most. But it's also obviously famous for being where Tintin meets Captain Haddock, who would go on to be the crowd favorite companion. He is a little bit more drunk and a little bit more absolutely useless and goofy in this one than he is in other stories. He does have a bit of a, I mean, he's got a drinking problem throughout, I think, in the adventures, but in this one, he's a real loser drinker. And he's rescued by Tintin from a very bad situation in which he's being kept hostage, essentially, by being kept drunk all the time by people who are using his ship for nefarious purposes. This also has a nice, complex plot. It ties in nicely to things we have seen before. You've got Rastapopoulos and Alan, who, well, Alan actually makes his first appearance in this book, although he has been retroactively shoved into an earlier book because of a redrawing, because of in Cigars of the Pharaoh. In the original Cigars of the Pharaoh, it's not this character. This character is someone who comes for the first time in this one. But the Crab with the Golden Claws is also, the Tintin movie was based partially on this. There's a connection to the Middle Eastern kingdoms that is continued over here. But there are also sequences like this in which Captain Haddock gets completely drunk and fights with Tintin and, beats him on the head with a bottle. This is the kind of Haddock that we never see again. We do see him get drunk and we do get him do stupid things, but this particular violence against Tintin and knocking him out and making them crash after he had already burned their boat, etc. It's a little odd, especially when you look at Haddock later. You do have him express regret and cry and boohoo, but he's kind of a pathetic character and remains, for the most, a pathetic character. So if you're a fan of how Haddock transforms into a much more likable character while staying an angry drunk in many ways, he takes on a little bit more gravitas, he takes on a little bit more confidence, he takes on a little bit more in chargeness in later adventures. But this one does have the desert. I am a sucker for the desert. It does have trains and planes and ships. It does have a full page illustration. It's got some great artwork. It's got some great characters. It's got a twisting, turning plot, and it's definitely one of the more mature mature stories, because the complexity is now ramping up. I will say that I'm not going to put this as high as some people are going to put it, and it's probably going to get me into trouble. Many people would probably put Crab with the Golden Claws at the excellent level. For me, it will be at best a great book. I respect its historical importance. I love Haddock. He's one of my favorite characters in all of comics, so I love his introduction. But like with most introductions, like with Tintin's introduction in Soviets and Congo, it's not what the character eventually is. And there are angles of him that have yet to be worked out and sanded out. The setting is fantastic, but once again, I think the setting is played better later on in other things. So perhaps controversially, I'm going to put it in pretty good. I'm going to put it ahead of Cigars of the Pharaoh. And I wonder if this is going to get me brickbats in the comments. Maybe I should just avoid the comments over here and move on. It has a great dream sequence. That's true. I do love the Tintin dream sequences, but again, there's something about those dream sequences that feel truly dreamlike. They cut, so from frame to frame, like backgrounds and foregrounds and items change and people change and their clothes change, and it's fantastic. It really does feel dreamlike, and at the same time there's something very terrifying about that dream sequence in particular. If I put it in pretty good, I don't like Tintin in the Desert books. It is, I mean, if I was going by covers, I would put it right up there at the top. It's a great cover. I love the blue. I love the desert. I love the bottle breaking in his hand. And the thing is that you don't know it's being shot at, right? So the cover has a little bit more mystery than the sequence does inside, because inside it's like it's being it's being shot at, but on the cover you don't know that it's being shot at. So that is where I will put the Crab with the Golden Claws. I think I better get a move on. I'm still not done. I'm not halfway through. The Shooting Star. I will say and I'll be quick about this one. I will say that many people don't like the shooting star. I'll say that many people, when I was a child, and I was reading these Tintin things, and I didn't read them in order. You read them whenever they were available, and they were very expensive. So if someone had one, you would. And these were the kind of books that you didn't lend to people because they were so expensive and they could be ruined. So if you wanted to read someone's Tintin, you went to their place and you read their Tintin, and they came to your place and read the Tintin. I think as you got older, maybe you did, but I don't know. I think I lent out one Tintin and it came back in less than good shape. It wasn't even torn; like the cover was folded, and I think my mom was very upset about it. So we usually got them from libraries, and if you managed to own one or two, like for a birthday present, you got one because everyone chipped in to buy you a Tintin. Then you'd have a couple. So the thing was built slowly. So when I was young, I was told famously by more than one person that the shooting star is the worst Tintin. It's just like, it's crap. Don't read that. You're fine not reading it. Someone said it's okay. And someone else said, yeah, I don't like that. And someone else said, that's the worst one. Someone told me that's not even done by Herge. So there's such a dislike for this story for some reason, that I have seen this all my life. And I have to say that I don't kind of agree. So now, after I've done this nonsense with the crab with the golden claws, I'm going to come in and defend the shooting star. But it doesn't need defending per se. But the shooting star is, first of all, it has a great opening. It's one of the, and I'll talk a little bit about another one, but it's one of my favorite openings. It's like there's something in the sky. It's getting hotter. What is it? And then there's this observatory that Tintin goes to, and this entire opening of where they discover that this is headed towards Earth, and that's the end of life on Earth, and that it's an extinction level event. I don't know if they use that term, and this is it's the end of the world, and now with the end of the world impending on them, like it starts getting so hot that the tar is melting off the road and rats are running. I mean, this stuff is scary stuff. It's really good. And they spend page upon page. And then you have another hallucinatory dream sequence in which he gets this connection with the spider that he saw, etc. And this is then they realize their calculations are wrong. The shooting star is not actually going to hit the Earth, and then it becomes a chase story to find the one fragment that is going to land over there. And first of all, I love the beginning. Second, I thought that the whole space stuff was quite interesting, where first it was going to be the end of the world, and then it was going to be a race. Second, it put Captain Haddock to use immediately. So he shows up as a drunk in the previous one, and in this one, he's got a friend, and they've got a ship, and they can get a boat, and he's kind of in charge. He knows what he's doing. He's in his environment. He's in his element. And then you've got this chase story over there. And I think that the ending of it with the strange powers that are on that little island and with it sinking, etc. I don't know if that's the thing that people don't like, but I don't agree that it's the worst Tintin by any stretch of the imagination. I find it quite a good adventure. I find parts of it kind of terrific, actually. I love the fact that he sees a spider right at the beginning, and then the spider is this kind of recurring motif, and it just comes up, and then right at the end you have this thing of where the spider plays a role. And it's enough density and enough texture for me as a child to really appreciate this. Like, long before I learned about Chekhov's gun or foreshadowing or any of those things, this was a very thematic, imagery oriented sort of thing. And by switching from this doom to this optimism to this chase, it gave these 62 pages this nice density. I don't really understand why people dislike it so much. In fact, I think if you go back to it, it's got some of the best nautical scenes. So if you're a fan, Tintin in the desert, Tintin on ships. If you're a fan of ships and the ocean going stuff, it's terrific. It's fantastic. There's a boat that has a plane on it, and then the plane takes off, and then there's a jumping out of the plane, and there's boiling water. It's a wonderful kind of chase thing, and I'm going to say that for me, this is going to be a pretty good. And I'm going to say it's going to be a pretty good, I think, better than Cigars of the Pharaoh. I'm not sure. This is why I don't like ranking stuff. Okay, it's hard enough for me to put them into these separate categories, but I'm going to say fine. I'm going to put it between Cigars of the Pharaoh and The Crab with Golden Claws. The Shooting Star probably ranking higher than most people would rank it. Probably going to piss some people off, but I really don't understand it, and I would love to know exactly why people think, apart from like, ooh, things are larger because of this meteorite, etc., which is fine. We've seen a lot more ridiculous things happening in Tintin. I mean, like, why should an alien thing not make life forms that it finds on Earth larger in size somehow, when otherwise we don't have a problem with Tintin finding a beard to disguise himself in the middle of a chase sequence. But I think it's tightly done. I think it's tightly written. How can it be better than Cigars? It's an interesting question. I find it to be more interesting than Cigars of the Pharaoh, to be perfectly honest. Cigars of the Pharaoh, if I finish the whole thing, then I can say, all right, this is what the story was about. But on a page by page basis, like moving from one page to another, that's really what I think about as like good storytelling in certain ways, especially in adventure storytelling. The Shooting Star holds my attention. The Shooting Star catches my attention and keeps me attached to it. And Cigars of the Pharaoh, as many times as I've looked at it, it's in pockets, but then there's a lot of dead air between those pockets. And are those pockets great? Yes, they are. But this dead air in between them and the kind of faffing around and the wasting of time when you could just move along, I don't find there to be a lot of that. And I know that people think about the Shooting Star as being less consequential, but I just find I find it to be a much more kinetic adventure. I find it to be moving forward really well. And I do think that it's the ending that spoils it for people. And it's a fine ending. It really doesn't even take that long. I mean, he's on the thing for like a couple of pages. It's just he gets to the island before everyone else does. But I think people wanted a bigger climax. But also, I believe that the reason the Shooting Star is usually maligned so much is that it comes between The Crab with Golden Claws and The Secret of the Unicorn. And that's not the Shooting Star's fault. I mean, the idea is here's Haddock's introduction, and he's a sea captain thing. And here is the beginning of one of the great one of the greatest sea adventure stories, treasure hunting, blah 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 stuff. So if you're in between those two, you're just going to suffer in comparison. That's my theory, at least. Which obviously takes us on to the next. No, where am I? All right. So the Secret of the Unicorn. Now we've been talking about various things that people have called their favorite comic. Probably the most, maybe there's one more that people call their favorite Tintin more often than The Secret of the Unicorn, or maybe a couple, but it's right there in the top three as far as viewer comments on my Tintin videos are concerned and my conversations, and for very good reason. The Secret of the Unicorn sometimes is given to people as, read this as your first Tintin, or if you've never read any Tintin, read that. And then the other people will be like, no, you've got to know how he encountered Captain Haddock and who these people are and blah 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 and all that stuff. And then I would say, well, actually no, not necessarily. You could absolutely read any Tintin, unless it's an absolute two-parter like Red Rackham's Treasure and Prisoners of the Sun, etc. You could kind of just read them in any order. You'll fill in your own chronology. If you're reading the redrawn versions, you might find things a little confusing. But The Secret of the Unicorn is an absolutely fine fine example of a great book to start a series from, even though it's in the middle, because it really captures what the entire series is for many people: a sense of adventure, discovery, and this is quite literally swashbuckling adventure. You've got a pirate story in the middle of a flashback, one of the great flashback narratives. Even the frame of it is really, really funny. It's got fantastic art. This, by this point of time, I think we're getting into that thing where the art is just sublime, over and over again. Let me. Here we go. So beautiful, beautiful ship stuff, beautiful ocean stuff, beautiful pirate stuff. It's just, it's all good. There is no, there is, I find it difficult to find flaws in this adventure, because, like the same kind of reasons that I was enjoying Shooting Star, once it picks up, it kind of doesn't let go. And the interesting thing is, this is where I think you'll see a lot of things like, you'll see similar things to The Broken Ear, or Cigars of the Pharaoh. You'll see many people after one thing and you don't know why they're after it. You'll see bids and people saying, hey, can I get that from you? And then you'll see a duplicate or a replica version of it, very similar to what we saw in The Broken Ear. But this is just interesting. You're intrigued from moment one. Things keep twisting and turning. As one thing unravels, you have another expectation. That expectation is confounded by another expectation. It just gallops through. And then when he finds this little clue, and the fact that this wasn't found by the people who ransacked his apartment because it had rolled under his table, because Snowy had broken the thing, everything fits together so well. You've kind of stepped out of that land of coincidence and, unfortunate timing a little bit. It's still there, but now it's being driven by the characters. Now it's much more believable, and it's not, because it makes sense. And every little bit of it being thought out that way is fantastic for this mystery, which is essentially a treasure hunt, or the beginnings of a treasure hunt, in which you get this flashback, you get this history of what this could be about, and these things start coming together. And even the sideways throwaway things like the pickpocket who's out there robbing people, and this is just, you thought that was a frame to get Thompson and Thompson involved in the story, even that comes in to being a crucial plot point of how these treasure clues are completely found. And then you get to the end, in which it's like, we found it, let's get going. And I don't think that there wasn't, I mean, this is the kind of book that you think about when you think about that stand up and cheer sort of ending. Like, you go through that whole thing and then you're like, wow, what we found the three pieces put together, we've gotten the clues. It's fantastic. The Secret of the Unicorn is probably, it is one of the best Tintin adventures, but it's the one that I think deserves the hype. And there's a very good reason why this was the basis of the first the movie, along with Crab with Golden Claws. It did a very good thing, and a good job of putting those together in the Spielberg Peter Jackson movie. But in the comics, this sets up an expectation that every other Tintin has to live up to. It's like, you've got to be this tight, you've got to be this funny, you've got to be this interesting, you've got to be this swashbuckling, you've got to have this much, heroism, you've got to have this much villainy, you've got to have all of that. The only problem, I think, is the Bird brothers who live in Marlinspike. I mean, I wish I knew a little bit more about them, because they're kind of like these rare antiquities dealers, and then they get arrested, and I think in the next adventure they escape, but nothing ever happens of that. So that's one thing that goes kind of nowhere. But Secret of the Unicorn, superb adventure. It does end on a sort of cliffhanger, but it really ends as a good part one should end. It's like, here we've gotten all the clues, and now we are on our way to find the treasure. We've put together all of this stuff, and it would seem to me that that's what it should be about. It should be about the treasure and the finding of the treasure. But the fact that you can take half the story just to get 3 pieces of paper that will tell you where the treasure apparently is, I think that was a significant thing, because the pacing of it didn't make you feel like, I think in most places you would put that together as the first third of the story, or maybe the first quarter of the story, and the rest of it would be the swashbuckling treasure hunting adventure. Whereas this is actually the clue hunting, and the number of people who are interested in it, and the number of people who want to get to it. Again, things we have seen before, but now done with perfect pacing. I think I would definitely be able. I mean, I'm quite confident that I can put The Secret of the Unicorn up at the excellent, or maybe it's our first sublime one. I think it's a very close call. It's definitely excellent. Should it be high enough to be sublime? What else is going to be in the sublime category? That's what we have to know. So, what I'm going to do is, because it's all been filled in except for right at the top, I'm going to put Secret of the Unicorn in as my first sublime pick. Now, here, I'm going to pick up the pace a little bit, because I realize I've been taking a long time, but it's because it's interesting. But now what I'm going to face is something that I've been thinking about, and I've been wondering how both the live stream viewers and people watching this later, if people watching this later, are going to think about this. But I'm going to take the sequel to Secret of the Unicorn, which is essentially part two. And I would say this is the first part one, part two. Now, Cigars of the Pharaoh and the Blue Lotus are often considered part one and part two, because one does lead into the other. But I think of them as two very distinct stories that happen to have that sort of connective tissue. And one does lead to the other, but Cigars of the Pharaoh is the complete story before the Blue Lotus begins. Whereas the Secret of the Unicorn, as satisfying as it is, isn't a complete story. It's the first half of a story that obviously ends in Red Rackham's Treasure. And to me, the Red Rackham's Treasure, another terrific comic, but it's not at the same level for me as Secret of the Unicorn. The setup of Secret of the Unicorn. And it's ironic because, not ironic, it's kind of funny, because Red Rackham's Treasure is the treasure hunt part of it. It's when they're out there, they're on the ocean, Professor Calculus is introduced. He's got this invention, they use this invention, they get to an island, they find things on the island. It's full of stuff, but at the same time, it doesn't have quite the propulsive energy or the unique mystery of The Secret of the Unicorn. This is obviously not true for the entire book. I think especially the underwater sequences in Red Rackham's Treasure are among my favorites of any Tintin adventure, particularly the finding of the ship itself. I do think it takes some time to get started. They spend some time talking to Calculus and telling him that they're not interested in his invention. They're out there searching for a diving suit, and there's all of this stuff that's going on. So it isn't until page 12 that they actually take off, and then page 13 they're still taking off, and Thompson, and the only reason the Bird brothers are mentioned is because they've escaped. There might be a danger, so Thompson and Thompson are coming with you. It's just an excuse to get them on the ship and get them going. But once they get going, and there they are trying to chew their tobacco, and they find that Professor Calculus is on board the ship, etc. But when they get to the island, first of all, you get some of that nice verdant greenery, some beautiful forest artwork. Then you have hijinks with monkeys and parrots, obviously. Then you have the underwater sequences. You've got them finding rum. There we go. One of the most beautiful panels, and one of the most famous for a very good reason. Just terrific adventure stuff. But of course, the whole part of this, I love the stuff with the shark, although it goes on for a little too long. But they do find stuff. They find rum, they find things, they find a cross. But it's like some other Tintin stories. It's just full of one red herring after another, one clue leading to nothing after another. And I think this is where, right at the very end, it's funny because I think Red Rackham's Treasure, many people will say this is a fantastic comic and this is a great comic, and there'll be many people who'll say the Shooting Star isn't, and I don't quite sorry, I don't quite see the difference, because Red Rackham's Treasure has an ending that's a purposeful anticlimax or a purposeful shift away. It's a thing that Herge liked to do, and I think Red Rackham's Treasure is one of the most ambitious things, in which he takes you halfway across the world looking for a treasure, and they don't find it, and it's right under their noses or something like that the whole time, and there is an irony in that, but it's less satisfying, or at least to me, the first time I read it was less satisfying, that it was just here and it was something to do with a religious figure or a saint or something like that, and then you press a button over here and you get that. What you do have is Marlin Spike sort of becoming Haddocks, and Professor Calculus buys it for him, which is, really nice gift. Thank you. And then they start living there together. It's just like, why not? But it's like a great thing to have right at the end, and the establishment of Marlin Spike Hall, which for the rest of the Tintin series is going to be such an important place. But I don't like Red Rackham's Treasure at the same level. I still think it's an excellent comic, but I don't like it at the same level that I do The Secret of the Unicorn. So I would place Red Rackham's Treasure as excellent, or maybe at great. This is a little difficult for me. If I had put Secret of the Unicorn at excellent, Red Rackham's Treasure at great would be a no-brainer. But I don't know if there's a gap of 2 between them. And at the same time, I don't know if I would honestly put Red Rackham's Treasure at excellent. There are excellent parts of it for sure, but as a whole story, the way that I approach Secret of the Unicorn, and the way that it captures me. So you know what I'm going to do? In order to do this correctly, I'm going to say I'm going to put The Secret of the Unicorn down to excellent for now. I'm going to see how this ends up. Now, I'm also going to say that the same kind of thing actually applies for I forgot to show you the thing of what I was doing. Yes, so I think I'm going to move The Secret of the Unicorn down to excellent, and Red Rackham's Treasure to great. They're close, but there's a distinct difference between the two of them. I do not look upon them as the same adventure. They are the same story, but they're two very different types of adventure, and they're two very different types of storytelling, and they both have high points. I just think The Secret of the Unicorn has many more high points. I'll still be tempted to move this up 1 and this up 1, but we'll wait and see what happens. And the next 2 that have that come up are also 2-parters. So this is, I would say, for many people, if we looked at it, if we look at the entire, all of the Tintin stories, if we look at all of them, I think we could say that from here onwards, from after the Shooting Stars, so where are we? Secret of the Unicorn onwards, you just hit a kind of a streak, a stride of, there's a bit of a spoiler, but it's all good stuff from over here. It's superb consistency, it's excellent, and any opinions that we have will be really splitting hairs. So if I go back to my list, I'll say that the same thing kind of applies for the next 2 stories. I would say The 7 Crystal Balls is excellent or sublime. 7 Crystal Balls I would put as sublime, and Prisoners of the Sun 1 step down at excellent or at great. Because to me, The 7 Crystal Balls maybe, and it's not absolutely because of what's coming up, of course, it may be the most perfect Tintin adventure there is. It's just, it captures my imagination. It's got spooky stuff. It's got supernatural stuff. It's got world traveling. It's got terrific art. It has Captain Haddock as a gentleman in Marlinspike with a monocle and a tweed coat and things like that. It's got great thing, but it's got a sense of dense textured storytelling where they're attending a magic show and something is revealed over there, which then connects to something else that is something quite different. As in, there the story doesn't come to you as prosaically and as straightforwardly as it has in the past. Over here you have the comedy, you have the gags, a lot of this coming from of Captain Haddock now being a gentleman and attending all of these things, these kind of shows, and General Alcazar shows back up as Ramon Zarate. All of this stuff is just set up to a kind of curse of these archaeologists and explorers who are all being afflicted by this sleeping curse, and then their trip to investigate what's going on and how it culminates, with in this hospital sequence of everyone having these convulsions. The sense of mystery is terrific. It deepens and deepens, and at the same time, you've got Professor Tarragon's place, which is this Agatha Christie-esque manor, full of. Well, I mean, I'm trying to find the right. It's got libraries, it's got fireplaces, it's got the mummy in a display case. It's just every single presentation of this is so rich, and the storytelling is so tense, and the details of it. And there's a time, there's a lot in Tintin that can seem expository. There's a lot of text. I mean, of course, it's not as much text as I saw in Blake and Mortimer, but for a lot of people, that text can be a little off-putting. But I think it's handled really well in Prisoners of the Sun, where like with The Secret of the Unicorn, there's a lot of narrative and a lot of background to fill us in on, but it does it in a way that seems elegant. For me, the suspense that is created, the terror that is created, the mystery, the environments, and the very much like The Secret of the Unicorn. It's a setup to say, what is it that we need to do? What is it that we need to fix? What is it that needs resolution that actually happens in the next adventure? It's the learning of it. And I think the pacing of these stories, to say that finding these things out and answering questions is as intoxicating and as thrilling and as interesting as the actual world trotting, jumping off a plane and firing a machine gun from a boat onto a plane, or firing from a helicopter as you cross a lake. It's as exciting as those things. And I think that's where these stories made the impression that they did, is that you didn't have to be the cowboy riding the horse to be exciting. You could be just investigating stuff. You could just be trying to find out what it's about. So I would definitely say the Seven Crystal Balls and The Secret of the Unicorn, two excellent ones. Seven Crystal Balls gets the edge over Secret of the Unicorn, maybe because it's so perfect in one way. But the only other thing is that it is a two-part story, and it needs a second part to finish itself, and that's where The Prisoner of the Sun comes in, which is also a great comic, and it has terrific adventures abroad, and you get a little bit more of those things that I've enjoyed: the forests and the mountains and the wildlife and the snakes and birds and animals, these kind of things that we have seen in The Broken Ear or Cigars of the Pharaoh, things like that, but again done with that. But because, I don't know, maybe it's the setup and resolution, because as I look at this list, I realize that that is also going to come up one more time in the future. But for now, I'm going to say that I will say Prisoners of the Sun, I will put it at the excellent level, Seven Crystal Balls at the sublime level. I'm not sure if the Black Island should be in the sublime level. I'm not sure if Secret of the Unicorn should be at the sublime level. I do think I'm going to put Secret of the Unicorn as quote unquote, than Prisoners of the Sun. But again, it's the one part, two part thing. And then we come to the land of black gold. So if I'm okay, that's Prisoners of the Sun. All right, Land of Black Gold, I'm going to be very frank, is one of my favorite Tintin adventures. I think it's fantastic. I've talked to many people about it who agree with me, and there are some people I've talked to who don't understand at all what I mean. But I love this adventure. Now, some of this might have to do with that nostalgia factor that we've been talking about. It was something I had read early, but when I talk about Tintin in the desert, this is the comic that I think of. And again, like the Shooting Star and like a couple of others, I think it has a terrific story, a terrific start to the story, which is, again, from a comic Thompson and Thompson point of view. You get to these exploding cars and the problem with the fuel, and then the rise of tensions in the Middle East because of oil and because of the experiments of what's going on. And then he has to investigate. And this is where he goes undercover as a ship's radio operator. And this fascinated me as a child. Then you've got Thompson and Thompson doing the same thing that they did in the Blue Lotus, and showing up in ridiculous costume, thinking this is how they're going to blend in to being staff on this ship. And then everything on this ship is a lot of fun. Like, who are these people? What are they about? What are they trying to do? And then again, red herrings, where every time you think this is something connected with what he's investigating, it's about something else. The police and the military once again show up on shore. Once again, Tintin is arrested. This is something that has happened before, but this is what I mean about how different this is, even though it's so similar to the kind of stuff that we saw in what was it? The Cigars of the Pharaoh, in which everything that you had in Cigars of the Pharaoh is polished and tightened and finessed in Land of Black Gold, as far as the as far as the thing is concerned. You also have the recovery, the return of Mueller, who was in the Black Island, which I loved. You've got the desert, and you've got mirages. This is the comic that taught me about mirages. And when I first saw my first mirage, I was a little disappointed because I really expected a complete 3D hologram, the way that this comic represents them. But you've got a fantastic desert adventure. I think every single part of this, the sandstorm, and then finding the city and being arrested and meeting in spite of a little bit of I don't know, because he doesn't really go brown face in here the way he's gone blackface in a couple of earlier adventures, but he does disguise himself as an Arab, I suppose, quite easily, just by putting on some sunglasses and a hat, which I guess is the stuff for that fun adventure stuff. You've got to be able to disguise yourself. And you also have Haddock turning up right at the end. And I had this impression, I was just like, why is he right at the beginning and right at the end, when once it's a Haddock's, once he's been introduced, why isn't he in the adventure more? So I do remember being a little irritated that he wasn't a part of the adventure until the very end. But we never get to find out why, because of Abdullah's prank cigar. But this is a fantastic story. This is a fantastic comic. I love it. I am not really sure what most other people think of it, but for me, I'm going to probably surprise people and put this and I'm going to put, I'm on the wrong screen again, aren't I? Yes. And I'm going to put this up there in the sublime category because of what it means to me, because of how great I think. I can think about so many things, like that nighttime attack on the oil pipeline, and the, eating of dates, and Snowy, wondering how he can't gnaw through them because they definitely have bones, and the spitting out of seeds. All of these sequences, they're done so well. And that's really what I find to be, I don't know, that's what I find to be so great about Tintin, is that evocation of time and place and the moving of the story. And the black the Land of Black Gold, just it not only moves, but it creates that sense of place, it creates that sense of danger, creates a sense of adventure that I enjoy about the series in a way that I find to be quite peerless. So um, it's difficult, and I can see in somewhere in the comments that they're so close that I have trouble ranking them. That's exactly that. It's like I'm just challenging myself to rank them in this way. But this is again very personal, very idiosyncratic. But I do think The Land of Black Gold is a superb album. It's one of my absolute favorites. Now we move on to Destination Moon and Explorers on the Moon. Probably two of the most famous, if not the two most famous Tintin stories. I would say that the two-parters are probably the most famous ones. So Secret of the Unicorn and Red Rackham's Treasure, Seven Crystal Balls and Prisoners of the Sun, and Destination Moon and Explorers on the Moon. But over there, and I don't have any data for this, I just get the impression that Seven Crystal Balls and Prisoners of the Sun are not as, when we talk about these three two-part stories, it's not as famous as the moon land, because obviously the story was written before the real moon landing took place, and it ended up being quite authentic in many ways. But it's the sense of adventure. But I find the same thing happening again as happened before, in which I find Destination Moon to be a sublime comic and Explorers on the Moon to be an excellent comic. And I don't know if this is now a true I don't know if this is a true evaluation, or if to me Herge is just better at setup than he is at resolution. And that's not to diss on the resolution, because those two-parters have great part twos. It's just the part ones are absolutely fantastic. They're so great that it's almost as if the second part has a tough time living up to the first part. And Explorers on the Moon would be a fantastic comic by any standard except for Destination. And what I find to be quite curious is Seven Crystal Balls, you're trying to figure out what's going on before you actually go to Peru and then find out what's going on over there in the forest and in the mountains and in the Andes. In Secret of the Unicorn, you're trying to gather these scraps of paper and try to figure out what all this stuff is about. It's Red Rackham's Treasure, where you're out in the ocean, you're going underneath, and you're going to the shipwreck, and you're going to the island, and you're doing the digging and the diving. And it's the same thing with Destination Moon and Explorers on the Moon. Destination Moon is all about the setup. It's all about where is Calculus, what's he working on, who are these other people who are there, and what's the training procedure, and what are they building, and what are their tests like. It's Explorers on the Moon, in which they actually go to the moon and land on the moon and have the thing, and then you've got the pretty dark stuff with Wolf that happens. So the second part is really where the action happens, and the first part is where the setup happens. I'm being very simplistic over here, but the setup is so good, is so fantastic, that it makes the action slightly pale in comparison. Maybe this is just my point of view, but it's for each of these two-parters. So I'll just say that for me, Destination Moon is a superb story, because it doesn't have to be all about action, because there is so much of it that's conversation and talk and planning. But what you're talking about is something so fantastic, and the level of detail and the level of patience that Herge shows in taking the time to do this. And not just like, oh, I've been hired by the government to go to the moon, and here's a rocket and let's go. It's that whole thing, taking that time, that I find to be peerless. And so Explorers on the Moon is fantastic. It really does tickle your imagination, but the expectations being set up for it while still being on Earth, while being confined in a military space place, there's some bad guys out there who are trying to steal some secrets or do something first, etc. But it's inconsequential. In fact, sometimes I've talked to people who've completely forgotten about that part of Destination Moon. Where they're like, wait, there are some bad guys? Oh yeah, there's somebody trying to sabotage the thing. What did they want? Are they from another government? Did they want the technology? They've kind of forgotten about that. It becomes about calculus, Haddock, Tintin, and Snowy, getting ready for this. And the calculus Haddock stuff in Destination Moon is also some of the funniest comedy I've seen. I mean, there's a lot of lowbrow humor of just pratfalls and gags and stuff like that Tintin is very good at. There's the series, and I don't think that they've been done better than Calculus and Haddock and Calculus's reaction to acting the goat, playing the goat, as it were. But yes, so I think that's an interesting thing for me. Part ones better than part twos, which is not to say, look, the part twos are pretty high up also. I'm putting them all within the great, excellent area. But the part ones are the ones that come close to, yes, who's acting the goat? That acting the goat part is, I don't know, it's like I'm an old man with gray in my beard and it still makes me laugh. Because I think the characters of Calculus and Haddock are so well etched in my mind. And that's definitely gives Destination Moon a leg up. All right, next up, the Calculus Affair. Now, I don't like the Calculus Affair. I'm joking. If any of you have watched my top 6 Tintin, this will not come as a surprise to you. And I might have mentioned this before, but I do have my top 5 Tintin. Although things might have changed, and that's why my full ranking will say. But the one thing that has not changed, and I will say this, the Calculus Affair is the best Tintin adventure. It's the single greatest Tintin adventure, and by quite a mile, I would say. It's the absolute epitome of Herge's storytelling craft, of his pacing, of his editing. When you think about all the loose stuff there's very little fat in the Calculus Affair. When you think about, are they offensive things? And there's none of that over there. It's just moving along. And not only is it one of my favorite adventures, I would say that there is a thing that you can do with Tintin stories, and a lot of them were serialized. Most of them were serialized in page form, like one page at a time. And so Herge did come to this system in which he was able to have a page kind of have a little bit of a story, and he would leave you with a stinger or a cliffhanger or something that will make you want to get to the next step. Now, he wasn't able to do this all the time, and if you look at his earlier stuff, it's a lot looser, and that's what I mean by tight. And you can do this at home if you want to. Take the Calculus Affair and then go to the bottom right corner of every page and count how many of them are cliffhangers, or what I would consider, curiosity spikers, like things that make you want to turn to the next page. So even over here, for example, just at the first page, it's thunder that we know, but you don't know that right here. That's what happens over here. Next one, like on this page, there's someone watching them, and then there's someone watching them being watched by someone, and that's being, over here, question mark, bang, where's this guy gone? And it doesn't let up. Those are just the first 3 pages. This page ends a gloved hand knocking. This page, glass breaking, question mark. It's this, they haven't even, this is just the introduction of Jolly on Wag. They haven't even left Marlinspike yet. Every page ends with a stinger in a way that I think is peerless, and that's just the beginning. That's just the mechanical part of it. The characters, the adventure, the self-sacrifice, the way they want to protect their friend, the sci-fi idea at the middle of it, which he's invented a weapon that can destroy things by sound, and then various governments are out to get them. It's a chase story. It's mistaken identities. It's people pretending to be other people, cars driving off other cars into the, and then of course Captain Haddock with a fly repellent spray in a helicopter, chasing a motorboat across a lake that borders two countries, and the people, and they're trying to get on the radio and let people know, and it's Jolyon Wag, that idiot that they met right at the beginning, who got introduced, or who's on the thing. You've got a chase story that has a twist because the seat was hollow and the person was included in it, something that I talked about in one of my 31 Days of Comics videos. You've got Bianca Castafiore coming to their rescue. You do have every now and then a little bit of a coincidence and a lucky break, like the Colonel having a coat in the closet that they're hiding in, which they get their passes from, but that doesn't last forever, and they're quickly found out. But this is a great, just absolutely great adventure story. It's breathtaking how tightly it's written, how well it's plotted, how great the characters are, and even the ending of it. There are some ones that I complained about where you've got a slightly anticlimactic ending. You've got, you go all around the world and you end up back at the same place and that's where it was, etc. And Tintin does that a couple of times. Or you get to something like, oh, we found the thing and then it's just gone. So all the story was spent on something that is just resolved in 2 or 3 panels, and the Calculus Affair is not above that. It does that too, but it does it in a much better way and a much more satisfactory way. Not only would I say that the Calculus Affair is sublime, I would say it is the most sublime. There is nothing that is budging that. Just the way that I know that this bottom left is going to be Congo, irrespective of whatever happens over here. This top right is going to be the Calculus Affair. Nothing is going to change. Nothing is going to change that. So with that, I'm going to put the Calculus Affair up there because that is its true place. And if I was doing this in an order of ranking, that would have been the end of the video because that would have been the last comic that I would talk about. However, we do still have some to go. But if you disagree, that's fine. There's a lot that I've said over here that is disagreeable with. But this is the one thing that I would stick to my guns no matter what. It's like, this is the best one. It is best. It's the best technically, it's the best narratively, it's the best art-wise, it's the best story, it's the best pacing. But it's the whole package. It's got very little fat in it, and it propels things forward, and it rewards old-time readers. It is fantastic for new readers. It's just got everything that I want in a Tintin adventure, what Tintin adventures mean to me, crystallized into its perfect form. So the Calculus Affairs thing in Marlinspike, I love Marlinspike. I love that area. I loved it in even when the Bird Brothers had it in an earlier adventure, and I love every time we see it. To have Jolyon Wag and Nestor, sort of play a part in the story as characters. Tintin gets a lot of its power from these minor characters as well, and the Calculus Affair just puts them all in. It even has a gag with a sticky plaster. I think, yes, it's definitely in the Calculus Affair. That sticky plaster that he has on his nose and that that's stuck to his fingers, etc. It's just a gag that shouldn't work for as long as it does, and it works. It works really well, and it's very funny. So the Calculus Affair, the best Tintin adventure, bar none. My concluding statement on that. Next, we have the Red Sea Sharks. Now, here is one that I will say that maybe in my video on my favorite Tintin comics, this is the one I felt the most regret about, because the Red Sea Sharks is fantastic. It's a great ocean adventure. It's got the desert stuff. It's got callbacks. It's got looking forward. It's got a character who's on the cover, who was only introduced in the story, and I like that character, and I like when that character shows up again later in a later adventure. But the Red Sea Sharks, I don't know why. Maybe it's because, and like with the Shooting Star, although far less maligned, because I know a lot of people who love the Red Sea Sharks, but it doesn't get talked about as much, or people don't refer to it as much. Maybe because it's stuck between the Calculus Affair and Tintin in Tibet. And Tintin in Tibet, kind of like the Blue Lotus, is one of the most famous and the most beloved by a crowd of people. And the Calculus Affair is my favorite. So it's very famous for being that. But the idea is, I think that there really is no, as I was saying, what a streak. I think you go the Black Island, King Ottokar's Scepter, Crab with Golden Claws, the Shooting Star. They're all good, and I would say they're great. But Secret of the Unicorn, Red Rackham's Treasure, Seven Crystal Ball, Prisoner of the Sun, Land of Black Gold, Destination Moon, Explorers. This is a streak unlike any other streak. This is quite a, so this will seem like a letdown to some people because it's coming after that streak, and surely the streak has to end. But I don't agree. I think the streak does not end. I think not only is the Red Sea Sharks a great not only is it a great comic, it's one of my favorite. It's one of my favorite comics in this. It's got great comedy. It's got great artwork. It's got a great sense of place and environment and people and language. It's got ocean stuff. Again, it taught me a lot of new words and things like that. But I'm also kind of irritated that more people don't talk about this in high terms. So I will hope to correct that now by giving the Red Sea Sharks even the due that probably I didn't give it in my earlier video. I'm going to put it right at the excellent level. In fact, I wonder, am I going to court real enmity if I put it into the sublime area? Maybe I will put it in with the Land of Black Gold. There's something of, obviously there's the geography area, but I know it seems odd that I would place the Red Sea Sharks above the Secret of the Unicorn. So that doesn't seem right. So the Secret of the Unicorn would need to be in the sublime area as well. Is that too much sublime? Can I have like 6 sublimes and only 3 excellents? Does that make any sense? Should something? What would I take down to excellent? Land of Black Gold? No. All right. I'm going to come back to this because I think this is where I'm really going to have to. Yes. So I think Felix has a comment over here that the entire world building we got later into books like Cigars. Yes, the redrawn stuff comes from, I would say, from these books, from this middle period. So I'm going to keep that at the sublime area just because I do think there is something, especially, I mean, you can go back further, but especially from the Secret of the Unicorn onwards, I would say from the Black Island onwards, but from the Secret of the Unicorn onwards, I don't think there's much filler. I don't think there's anything, and I know that people have different opinions on these books, including on the Red Sea Sharks. But I don't know. I'm going to go back to this list because we've only got 4 books left. It's already been a long live stream, and I do want to chat a little bit about the final thing. So you know what? I think my B camera is almost out of thing anyway. It has different colors, but I'm going to go with Tintin in Tibet is going to be in the sublime. And the reason why, and here's the reason. I've got more than one reason. Tintin in Tibet is a great story about friendship and about believing. It's also a weird story in which Tintin puts a lot of faith into a dream that he has, but it's like this kind of, I know he's alive, and it's the kind of thing that we haven't seen Tintin do, and I don't think we see him do it again. I mean, there's a little bit right in the last adventure, but most of the time Tintin is an investigative journalist, or he wants to get to the bottom of something curious, or he wants to figure out why the crime has taken place. This one is a purely personal mission. He has a dream about a friend of his who's in danger, and everyone tells him his friend is dead, and he doesn't believe it, and he sets off for Nepal and goes to India and to climb the mountains to find the site of the plane crash, which people have gone to, and people have said there are no survivors, and he wants to do that. And it's there's something about that emotional connection that he has and what he's willing to do for that, and that kind of catapults into more and more characters. So Haddock over there is just like, you're crazy, you're ridiculous, you're nonsense, but I'm coming with you if you're doing this. The relationship not just between Tintin and Chang, which of course Chang as a character doesn't show up in the spoilers. He finds his friend who is alive, but the, it's the character of Tintin and it's the character of Haddock, and it's the two of them together, and the way that Haddock is the person who's trying to talk sense into this person who's driven and saying, okay, you can go back, I'm going to keep going, I'm going to keep doing this. And Tintin does this several times in the story. Marry that with this kind of landscape of the mountains and mountain climbing, and marry that to the fact that they spend some time in India, even though the taxi they take in India is like no taxi I've ever seen. It's this humongous red convertible. I'm just like, where in Delhi are those taxis? But they've got some time to kill in Delhi before flying to Kathmandu or something like that. So they go and look at the Qutub Minar and the Red Fort and all that stuff. So as a kid, I was just like, oh, this is better than Cigars of the Pharaoh, because this is stuff that I can recognize. And, yes, there's a bit of a joke with a cow because, if you're in India, you're going to have to make cow jokes and stuff like that. But it matches Haddock, who's always going to find a llama or something or the other to like irritate, if you look at the early Tintin stories, Tintin does that. Like, there's an alligator or a thing, maybe sometimes he drills a hole into the hide of a rhino to explode it, but Haddock takes over that comedic relief thing after he comes in. And so whether it's with a shark or whether it's with a llama, so that cow stuff comes in over there, all of that it's hilarious. It's very funny. The cow ends up depositing him in this fancy taxi that takes them to the airport. But it's also this kind of sadness in the story, and the story of the Yeti and the loneliness. It didn't have to be that way. It could have just been an adventure story. But once again, like with the Black Island and the gorilla right at the end, there's just this one last thing. It's like, poor gorilla, and his arm is broken and he's got a little tear in his eye, and that one panel of him with the arm in his cast and the tear in his eye is enough to make this villainous gorilla into a sympathetic character. And that's quite interesting, because he's this fierce creature that they're fighting or he's trying to avoid and all that stuff, and right at the end is a sympathetic creature. Now the Yeti gets a lot more character development than that. He gets a lot more eloquence put behind him, and it pays off, and it pays off in a very emotional kind of ending, which I was not expecting, and really holds up. At the same time, you've got some fantastic heroism there, not just from Tintin, but there's a dark moment in which Haddock nearly sacrifices himself, just so that Tintin doesn't fall to his death, and he's ready to cut his the rope that this thing. And again, there's not much. There's a lot of coincidences, but there's not ex machina. There is a guide who's taking them, and the guide says, okay, from now on, it's foolishness, I'm going to go back, you guys can do what you want. And so then they keep climbing, and then they're in trouble, and then they almost fall, and then they're trapped, and then Haddock's going to sacrifice himself, and then the guide comes back, and says, I just thought about, like, you're here to rescue somebody, and I live here, and it's one of my people, and I'm not doing it. There's just enough reason, and there's enough character, and there didn't have to be that kind of stuff. So it's that maturity and the complexity and the seriousness in telling that kind of adventure, crossing the world, swashbuckling story can have this stuff in it. And I think as a child, it was maybe like, ugh, it's so emotional, But as an adult, I've grown to love it. As a child, I love the New Delhi stuff. I love the mountain climbing stuff. I love the funny stuff, etc. But I was just like, oh, okay, so it's his friend, and he loves his friend, etc., etc. But as I grew older, I was just like, man, this is really, it really works for me. And it really works for who Tintin is, because of 23 adventures, there are certain things you see Tintin do over and over again, but there are certain things that you only see him do once or twice, and that's enough for him to get that permanent kind of position in your imagination. And I think Tintin in Tibet is one of those things, is that you don't necessarily get to see him be this Tintin in any other adventure, but who he is over here feels absolutely true to him and feels very consistent with who he is in other adventures as well. And it oddly colors the other adventures. Like, even if he's kind of being flippant in one of them, you're like, it's not just that, he's also that Tintin who's going to do that for Chang. So there's got this kind of nice retroactive character defining thing to it, which makes it very easy, I think, for me to place up there in the sublime category. It's still not going to be the calculus affair, though, and I'm probably going to have to do some rejigging around this area. But next we have the Castafiore Emerald. And this is another one of those, like the Shooting Star, that either people do not like or they're like, it's okay, I guess. It just doesn't compare. Whereas I am maybe in a sort of perverse rejection of that kind of way of thinking. I find the Castafiore Emerald to be fantastic. It's a I think maybe in the comments earlier why I saw Waiting for Godot flash by, and it's like I can understand that why. It's the only Tintin adventure that stays in one location, more or less, which is the Marlinspike Hall, and it is a Shaggy Dog story, and it's just like it's a question of red herring after red herring, and in fact. From the very beginning, in fact, from the Soviets, we can see there are a lot of red herrings. There are a lot of things where we think, oh, that's the bad guy, or oh, they're out to do that, and no, they're just smuggling drugs, or no, they were actually doing something else, or they thought that Tintin was. So it's almost like Herge decided to make a story completely full of red herrings and then say that I'm not even going to need to get on a boat or a train to do this. It's like an Agatha Christie murder mystery sort of thing, except that there is no murder and the mysteries are all full of red herrings and little Shaggy Dog sort of things. And you'll see a lot of things come back over and over again in Tintin Adventures, and it's that sort of textural density that gives you this pleasure, and the Castafiore Emerald is one of those in which you've got lots of little bits and pieces because they're staying in one place and they're staying in that one location. You've got a lot of character comedy, you've got a lot of commentary on the nature of celebrity and paparazzi and things like that. And then you've got this idea that maybe Tintin and the Haddock, they just need to have adventures. They need to have like mysteries and things to solve. And when they're just sitting at home, they'll manufacture it out of nowhere. It's very interesting, and I can understand why, if people are used to big, fancy, globe-trotting adventures with action, this almost experimental theatrical piece in which no one goes anywhere, no one does anything, is worthwhile. But I can't think of as I was saying, like the way with Tintin in Tibet, I think what Castafiore Emerald establishes for us as who these people are, what their relationship with each other are, what's the fabric of the world, and what's the nature of their relationships. And it's very funny, and it's very observational, and it has the stuff with the gypsies in it, the Romani people who are ostracized and looked upon as criminals, and Tintin is like the only real defender of them, but Haddock is like a casual thing. It's like, yeah, of course, you can't live next to a garbage dump camp over here. There's something, I mean, I understand it's like big rich guys being benevolent, but first of all, Haddock isn't a big rich guy with inherited wealth. We saw him get Marlinspike just a few books ago. But it just creates this sense of, this moral thing in Tintin, this moral right and wrong. And it's just so clear and so clean. And he just, there's a scene at night and there's a campfire and they're playing music and he's standing over there listening to that music, and it's a fantastic scene. And there's no real scene like that in any other Tintin adventure that I can think of, in which he just stands and appreciates something, and it's a group of people who are usually ostracized, and then when things go missing, there are also people who are blamed for stealing them. But then there are little tricks where they show you the girl with the little golden scissors, and so you're like, I guess they are thieves after all. There's a lot of that other stuff going on in a very complex way under the surface of what looks like a little comedy of manners at a manor. So I this is why I think I want to put this on Sublime, because I just want to do that because it's that good to me. But I'll put it in excellent. And I think I might be making some changes from my top 5 over here. My Sublime list and my top 5 video from, 5 years ago are not looking the same anymore. So obviously I've done some changing, or I might need to come back to that. But we only have 2 more... we only have 2 more books left. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw them onto the tier list, and then maybe I can do like a 10 or 15 minute famous last words, recap of where it stands and maybe see if I want to um, like like uh, move that around in any way. Um, Another one, I'm just looking at the random comments that happen to me when I come back to this screen. So as a kid, it wasn't interesting, but it's not up there with the greats. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't think that some of these, like, I don't think when I think about Tintin in Tibet, when I think about the Castafiore Emerald, even when I think about the Red Sea Sharks, there are parts of it that I think are appreciable. They're not that appreciable for a kid. Can't appreciate them that much, and I definitely think Castafiore Emerald is not something that a kid who's used to watching this reading these swashbuckling adventures would be into. But but that but I think the more I read it or the more I think about it, the Castafiore Emerald really stands out to me as a formal piece of experimentation that still gets character. Because you know what happens with formal experimentation is that character and narrative and emotion, those are the kind of things that get pushed to the side. Whereas with Castafiore Emerald, it doesn't, and it's actually quite funny. So I like those kinds of formal experimentation because they say it doesn't have to be at the cost of those other things that you enjoy. And if you've got 24 adventures a world, globe-trotting adventure, I think it's fine to have one in which you're just staying inside the house. And again, as I was saying, and this is the thing, it's like when I look at Seven Crystal Balls takes place indoors very much, and I love it. I love it more than I loved Red Rackham's Treasure, in which they're out in the world, and it's the same thing in a couple of other cases. So I think for me, the Castafiore Emerald ranks really high, probably, possibly higher than it does for most people. Um, then we've got Flight 714, which I think for most people is a comic that they do not like. And I've talked to many people now, and it's kind of like the Shooting Star, except it's not as bad as the Shooting Star. And I think because it's a later comic, the artwork is more polished. It's got a fantastic plane in it. It's got a great sort of villain, sort of comic character in Laszlo Caridas. It's got the return of Rastapopoulos and Alan. It's got the return of Scoot. It's got calculus being very. It's got a lot of stuff in it that I don't know. Once again, I'm not really sure where the hate comes from. I mean, I think Flight 714, and nowadays it's called Flight 714 to Sydney. I don't know why they changed the title to say to Sydney, but okay, fine. But I think Flight 714 is a really good comic. I mean, I think it's, once again, like the Shooting Star, the very ending of it might be the only thing that people hold on to. Because when I think about it, here's a plane. These guys are going to get on a plane because they're going to some convention, I think, right? Or something like that. They meet a millionaire. This billionaire is a famous millionaire, billionaire, whatever, and he invites them to fly on his plane because he wants to cheat at battleships, playing playing Captain Haddock, because he's got closed circuit television in his. He's so rich, he doesn't know what to do with his money that he's got to. He's a miserly rich man, but he wants to cheat using his electronic equipment, so he invites them on his private jet. This irritates the co-pilot and other people who are actually planning to kidnap him. And so now they've got all these extra members on this plane that he got onto there because he wanted to cheat. And so now they've got to be part of the kidnapping as well. And so then they do this and they take this island in which there is a runway and this netting system so that they can land this fantastic plane. And they're not interested in the plane. They're interested in his money. And then they disassemble the runway and no one knows that they've come to this island. And then they've got this truth serum in which he will give his account number, but it's a fantastic story. I don't know what people are talking about. It's great. I mean, again, the plotting of it is so good, as in every reason that something happens is based in character. Every time it turns, every time it twists, it happens because of weird, funny characters doing weird, funny things. The absolute very end of who this person is and where they came from, etc., people seem to get really hung up on it. And to me, it's not the same thing as like Asterix and the Falling Sky or something like that, where, you completely change the world. I mean, you've had supernatural stuff in Tintin before, you've had weird science fiction in Tintin before, and I guess people don't like space stuff coming into their Tintin stories. That's the only thing I can figure out. Is like, oh, Shooting Star and Flight 714, because there's that space stuff, that is weird space stuff. But I also think, even with the aliens ending of Tintin 714, they did it pretty well. I mean, like, oh, we didn't get to see the aliens. I mean, like, if we got to see the aliens, people would have been hung up on who those aliens are and what they look like. And that wasn't really the point. The point was, here is an absolute coincidence. Here's a thing in which they do this, and this is what they've been doing for many years. These bunch of kidnappers ended up picking the same island which this thing has been going on for. Our heroes ended up being in the kidnappers' plan because of, it all comes together interestingly, and it comes together well. And just the fact that this is out of left field means, what else could it have been? It's not really the point. It's not about making it more realistic. I don't think Flight 714 is as bad as people. In fact, I think it's very good. I think it's very funny. I think it's got the proboscis monkey and Rastapopoulos and Alan. It's got those kind of things in there. I think the two jackasses who are rich assholes or whatever, like, they get stuck with the truth serum. So Laszlo Karidas, like, arguing with Rastapopoulos about who's the more reprehensible person is very funny. I think the technology on the plane is very cool. I think cheating at battleships through closed circuit camera is very funny. I think Professor Calculus trying to demonstrate Savate is very funny. It's great. It's got memorable moments. It's got memorable characters. It's got a great setting, and so therefore I think that there is there's a ending part of it that colors people's opinions about the entire thing, and I don't even think the ending is that bad. Having said all of that, I will not say that it is in my sublime or excellent, but I will say that it will be in my pretty good or my greats. Now, the problem is, if I put it in great, which I wouldn't have a problem putting it in great, then somebody will say, you're saying it's better than the crab with golden claws. And I understand why they would say that, and they would fail. But I honestly think that the crab with golden claws has got moments, but as a whole story, it isn't quite as tight. It isn't quite as moment by moment, and it isn't quite as textured and rich. I will not put this above all of them, though. I would put it maybe over there if I'm taking that sort of order to it. And and we might revisit that, but I think my Flight 714 evaluation has often surprised people the way my Shooting Star evaluation has surprised people, and my Cigazo the Pharaoh, and maybe the Broken Ear, although I don't think I get a lot of pushback on the Broken Ear, but I think maybe Cigazo the Pharaoh, people will say that I'm wrong about that. It's this thing. But I don't mind the space stuff, because I don't think it's in my face, and I don't think that I want there to be no space stuff at all in adventure, etc. I kind of get it. Why? Because when you put adventure and Indiana Jones with aliens, you don't get a good history from that. But I do think you can do it, and I've read some Uncle Scrooge stories that has some spacey sci-fi kind of stuff, and it's okay. I like the fact that it only happens at the end, and I like the fact that it's so small, and I like the fact that it's brainwashed and all of that kind of stuff. To me, it's a very neat kind of thing. But over there, the one criticism I can say is, I didn't pay. I can see people saying that Herge didn't choose for it to be aliens because that was important. He chose it only so that everyone's memory could be erased. And that part of it, I'll say, okay, yeah, if that's the case, that's a good way of looking at it, and that's why I wouldn't put it higher. And now we come to the last adventure, Tintin and the Picaros, and I'm going to say that this I might end with a controversy, because I know people who absolutely do not like Tintin and the Picaros, and I'm not going to. This is not a joke, by the way. Someone, or more than one person, has told me that they hate, or they really don't like Picaros. And one of the reasons is because Tintin's pants changed. I mean, they may not have put it in that way, but that's literally just like, oh, he went to bell bottoms from plus fours or whatever it is. And uh, I mean, I get it if oh, I don't like Superman's cape changing or something like that. But anyway, that seemed like a weird kind of reason to me. But then there's other people who talk about it from the point of view of anticlimax, from the point of view of what's my story, blah blah blah. I love Tintin and the Picaros. I love it. I think it's fantastic. I think everything that I didn't like about those earlier stories, but appreciated what they were trying to do when it had to do with South America, when it had to do with the kind of snide thing about revolution and about the man of the people taking up military and the guerrilla warfare in the forest, etc. The fact that you land in San Theodros and you leave, a different country, or the name of the place has changed because the dictator has changed, but it's exactly the same thing. So the people are exactly, they're in the same condition. The fact that there's everything that is in there, whether it's that anti-alcohol, like the kind of invasion of privacy of putting something into someone's food, but it's for their own good, the kind of questions that come up from that, and the anger that Haddock has of being experimented upon. But really the sense of, once again, the sense of place, the sense of this fictional but South America, like it was giving me the sense of the carnival and the drinking and the weapons. Oh, the weapons, the guns in Tintin and the Picaros. I think that is the most beautiful guns of any of the adventures. There are handguns, and there are revolvers, and there are automatics, there are rifles, there are AK-47s. There are so many different kinds of guns that these people have, and it's so well done, this whole idea of this armed revolution, and Tintin coming in and saying that I will sober up your people because of this thing that my my friend has invented, but you can't do any bloodshed, and you've got to have a bloodless revolution. And the whole revolution takes place in the last one page, with this carnival and a whole bunch of cameos, I think, including Disney characters and maybe even Asterix, I'm not sure, in the carnival. But I've always thought Tintin and the Picaros is great, and I always like the fact that it was Calculus who was in danger, and then Tintin said that this is a trap, and Haddock doesn't care, and Haddock goes, and then Tintin comes and joins him. It was an unusual setup. It's not the way Tintin stories work, and at the same time, it created this sense of who these people are and why he comes over there. And that scene where he comes and he's like, why did you come? You were right, we're prisoners here and stuff like that. Why did you come? And he's talking to them, and he points out the cameras and the microphones in the hotel room. Man, as a kid, that was a fantastic sequence. It was great. And then when he's pointing out where a camera is, and the next panel is the people on the other side of the camera seeing the screen with his giant finger kind of looking at the screen, that perspective warp because of the lens, etc. It's cinematic. Before I had the vocabulary to say it's cinematic, it's so well done. The idea of the double cross, the idea that Pablo says that he's a good guy because he was a good guy after being a bad guy in what was it, the Broken Year. And so therefore in this one, if he is going to betray them, every single part of this story was, again, and this is what I think about the later stories and the Herge and the studios Herge stories, is that when I look at these later adventures, they all seem polished, they all seem fully formed, and they've got great scenes, they've got great characters, but they also have good storytelling. And I don't like it when people get stuck in a rut and they just kind of repeat the same thing over and over again. And it's one of those things that we see with, say, newspaper comics that have been running for a long time. And that's one of those things that Bill Watterson said about Calvin and Hobbes, where he was just like, I'm done and I don't want to overstay my welcome. And I think a lot of long running adventure series, a lot of long running stories, they get into the formula and they get into the rhythm, and that's successful for them, and so they keep with it. And what I've always, I think, appreciated about Tintin is, while it seems to us that there is this kind of formula, there isn't, because every story kind of does its own thing. And I think that's why these Tintin tier lists and these kind of conversations will always have so many different points of view, is because people will be like, I don't like it when they don't go anywhere, or I don't like it when it's all about this, or it's like this doesn't, it doesn't feel like that other story. and that's fine. I think that's what I like about them. I like the fact that those characters have to be consistent, and that's probably why the crab with golden claws isn't higher on my list, is because while haddock is introduced, it's not the same haddock that we know later, and it's quite different in consistency. Apart from that alcohol thing, it's a very different haddock, and so it's fine. It's a prototypical kind of character. But to me, Tintin and the Picaros is one of the best. It's one of my favorites. I love it. I love it. And if it is the last Tintin, I think it's a good enough Tintin for it. I mean, it is in that way. I mean, alpha art notwithstanding. And I think it's a fine send-off. You've got a lot of callbacks. You've got a lot of references to other adventures. You've got them either in character, situations, and places, or you've got them in tone and feeling. And you have Castafiore is over there as well. I think that might have been the first comic in which I encountered pasta when she throws it all over the guard. So for all those reasons and more, I would put this somewhere in the Sublime area. I'd say probably between Secret of the Unicorn and Land of Black Gold. Maybe behind Land of Black Gold. That stuff. Okay, so this is my final thing. I've got 2 in the not good, 1 in the not bad. I really thought there would be more in the not bad. 3 in the pretty goods. I've really top-loaded the Sublime. I think this is where I'm going wrong. I don't think it's fair. I think I should have 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So when I made my top 6 Tintin, I had Calculus Affair, Tintin in Tibet, Land of Black Gold, and Tintin in the Picaros. And I think the Black Island was the other one. So now I've demoted the Black Island from my top 6, apparently. And I've added more to make it a top 8. So I've got 8 out of 24 in Sublime, which I don't think is that bad. If, and this is just a theoretical, if I was to say, no, I need fewer in Sublime for whatever reason, which are the ones I would put to excellent? I would say maybe Tintin and the Picaros, as much as I love it. And maybe, I don't know. Tintin in the Congo, bottom left. Calculus Affair, top right. Those are the 2 I know for sure. Land of the Soviets next over there. Broken Ear. All right. So my bottom 3 I'm sure about. My top 1 I'm sure about. Like even from Tintin in Tibet onwards. I mean, like could I put Land of Black Gold right here? Yes, I could. Could I put 7 Crystal Balls over here? Yes, I could. I don't know. All of these are possibilities. All of these are things that I could do. But I think I don't know. As I said, this template is available on Tier Maker. I think it's available. I'll make it available. You can search for it if you want to. Let me know what your tier list would be have. That many Sublime for Tintin is okay. Yes, I think it is. I mean, if I wanted to think about Sublime as being truly Sublime, and even on a relative scale, I can't say, okay, 8 out of 10 are Sublime, because then why use that relative scale only? Yeah, Felix, you feel bad for cigars. I understand that. I really get it. I think what I would do is, no, I can't move cigars higher because it didn't appeal to me as much. I think it didn't appeal to me as much because I was reading it in context with a whole bunch of others. If I'd read it and then waited for a year and I'd read it early, and I did read the Tintins out of order. So you've got to understand that. Thank you so much for the super chat. I was completely thrown by that. I wasn't expecting that at all. Thank you so much. The Sublime row is fine. Okay, thank you. Yes. And I understand about Cigars of the Pharaoh. I get it. But I was reading Cigars of the Pharaoh. I probably read Cigars of the Pharaoh after I read, like, Secret of the Unicorn or something like that. Like, I've read the other ones mixed in. So I didn't read them chronologically, and I didn't read them in sequence. So I definitely didn't read them when they were first coming out. So that's why I think some of them didn't, because I could tell that they were earlier. I could tell that they were sketchier. So when you go from something as tight, even if you don't like it, Tintin and the Picaros is tight. Even if you don't like it, Castafiore Emerald is polished. It's got a sense of intention and deliberation that infuses every page and every panel. Whereas in Cigars of the Pharaoh, there's a lot of loose and stuff that's being formed, and it's completely fine. It was from a time in which he was experimenting and learning about these things, and he perfected them. And I think his studio mates helped him perfect it and got things to a particular thing. So I think the reason why there are so many Sublime is because how good they became at what they wanted to do, at what they wanted to do with scene, as what they want to do with pacing, what they want to do with environments and things like that. So yes, I will say, let me take one final look at this tier list. Tintin in the Congo, Land of the Soviets, Broken Ear, Cigars of the Pharaoh, Shooting Star, Crab with Golden Claws. This is probably a controversial area. I think people would say put Cigars of the Pharaoh here from the Shooting Star at least, or something like that. But I have to say, I love the doom-soaked start of the Shooting Star. I love the ocean stuff. I love Haddock and Chester, doing the Ruga Booga stuff. Everything about it is quite appealing to me. I even like the I like the flag and the plane and the boiling water. I like the spider stuff. Yeah, so the Shooting Star is, I'm an apologist for it, I suppose. Crab with the Golden Claws, Cigars of the Pharaoh, probably two classics that people would put much higher. Leaving aside their historical value, to me, the story, the characters, the tightness of the plot, the intentions, the ex machinas, the silliness, these are all more half-baked than they would be. Tintin in America coming in at great might be a surprising thing, and I'm perfectly willing to accept that, my personal nostalgia for it. But there's just something about that American myth storytelling that Herge wants to resist and is still seduced by, that I find to be quite to be one of those early comics. They don't have this flavor, because in this one you can see that he wants to do criticism and he wants to do cool stuff at the same time, which is not the case with the Congo, and it's not the case even with something like the Broken Ear. Flight 714, yeah, I think it's very good. I think it's much better than people give it credit for. And every moment in it that I could think of over here off the top of my head was something I enjoyed. The Blue Lotus is an avowed masterpiece. I might probably be ranking it much lower than many people would be, but that's just because I love King Otakar's Scepter, Red Rackham's Treasure. Again, these more mature, redrawn details, which the Blue Lotus doesn't have, puts them over the edge, in spite of the Blue Lotus having the start of the maturity. But I'd say the Blue Lotus, walked so that Tintin in Tibet could fly. It's that kind of stuff. But then the excellent category, Black Island, Prisoners of the Sun. Now, am I really saying Red Rackham's Treasure is not as good as Prisoners of the Sun? Okay, not as good. This is the problem with ranking. It's like they're all excellent. I love them all. But I will have to say, Prisoners of the Sun, I remember it more fondly. Maybe because of the jungle scenes, maybe because of the mountain scenes. I remember it more fondly than Red Rackham's Treasure. Red Rackham's Treasure, I love the underwater scenes, but again, there is a lot of faff. It does take some time to get started. I like the character and the comedy, but it's not as like Prisoners of the Sun and Tintin in Tibet. Even the prep stuff is funny and interesting. And Red Rackham's Treasure, it's a little spinning of the wheels. Explorers on the Moon, it's just not as great as Destination Moon. It's a fantastic comic anyway. Castafiore Emerald, terrific. Tintin, and from here on, it's all great. Land of Black Gold, Secret of the Unicorn, Red Sea Sharks, Destination Moon, Tintin in Tibet, Seven Crystal Balls, The Calculus Affair. I think my excellent and my sublime lines, I think I will bear no controversy. I will bear no argument on any of those. Everything from great to not good, I can understand. If you want to tell me Congo is great, fine. I guess it might be. But that's what I got. My clock says 3 hours, 37 minutes. It is 1:08 a.m. here in New Delhi, Sunday night. But thank you so much, everyone who has stuck around for all of this. I haven't gone through all the comments, and I will wait and I will go through all the comments. I do that for every live stream. It takes me maybe a couple of days, but I do like to go through the chat, which is another reason why I don't edit out right at the beginning, when I have like the live stream will start in 1 minute. When I first had my first live stream, I cut out that thing when I put the recording up there. But I realized that little bit of editing made all the chat disappear. And I enjoy the chat very much, and I want the chat to be part of the video for people watching it later. I think the chat doesn't load into the VOD until 12 hours later or something like that. But I will come back and I will read. Jasper, thank you so much for the super chat. Thank you so much. That's fantastic. And I'm so glad that all of you hung out for as long as you did. And if you came in halfway through, go back to the beginning and watch from the beginning. And you don't have to watch it in one go, even though I did talk it in one go. So, it's not that big a deal, apparently. But thank you so much, everyone, for hanging out. I hope you enjoyed this first time tier list. First time running a front facing cam, first time doing color grading and processing audio live, etc. So I hope it worked out all well for you. Have a good night, have a good day, have a good afternoon wherever you are. This has been For the Love of Comics, and I will see you at the next video. Bye.